Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're searching for an incredible novel, check out my Patreon page. Your support will help transform this story into an exciting audiobook. Join me on this adventure. By becoming a Patreon member, you'll be helping me keep creating and bringing this content to life. Thank you for being part of the journey.
Marvel. My wife is Hela, goddess of death, just Saiyan. Chapter 1. Prologue. The last thing I remember was being a student in the University of Maryland, studying cybersecurity, before I woke up here, in the body of a baby in a spaceship. It was confusing, why, for the simple reason being that I was reborn, but I have no clue how I died. As a matter of fact, all I remember was blacking out. I don't even remember any important stuff. Only thing that was important was the fact that I was a nerd. Not really a nerd, just watched anime. I was somewhat of a loner too. I remember not even getting my first kiss. Other than that, everything was well. Later that day, it was then I realized that I was a Scion called Kakarot, as I figured out my ship's database, and was sent on the planet to kill all life. Yeah, not doing that, but it brings me so much joy that I was Goku from Dragon Ball. Eventually, I crash-landed into a planet called Earth. Earth, it was a beauty. Although I've never seen it up close in the atmosphere, it was much different than the online pictures. You can rest assured on that. The atmosphere was strong, and it was really hot. I traveled through the city, brushed past and damaged a couple of buildings before I crash-landed on an empty grassy field. It was a big feeling, but it was more uncomfortable than painful. Oh my gosh, Ben, look. There I heard gasps and people talking. May wait dash. But apparently, he went ignored. Wait, May. Just when I was about to make connections to the impossible, something went up. The hatchet opened up, and May gasped. I cried out in surprise as well. This was freaking Aunt May from the MCU, or so it's looked like at least. My eyes widened in shock. My mind was recalling all the buildings that I passed by, surprisingly without any crashes. But that's not. How can this be? It's a baby. May breathed. We both stared at each other. May eventually smiled. I blinked as she picked me up. Her hands were cold. Let's adopt him. Ben hesitated. May, I don't think that's a good idea. Oh hush. May said, eyes never meeting mine. He's alone, with no one to care for him. We could always hand him over to the orphanage. Possibly the government? Ben muttered, not really sure about having an alien as a son, and wondered if this whole thing will come and bite him in the ass. May shot him a look. Ben cringed, then sighed, as he looked at the baby once more. He noticed his eyes widened. A tail. What's wrong, Ben? May held too much amusement at his reaction. It's not like he's going to turn into a giant monkey and start smashing everything in its path. I almost snorted. Please don't tempt Murphy. Suddenly the image of gigantic monkeys the size of mountains flashed in Ben's mind. He gulped. It's settled. May said, her tone leaving no room for argument, and sounded very happy. She happily hoisting me up in the air. Andrew Parker. That's your name. Ben sighed, having an alien as a son. He looked at the kid and saw that May was making faces and baby noises at the kid, causing the kid to start laughing. He stared at the scene for a moment before warmth filled his body. Just maybe he could get used to this. He smiled. Having an alien as a son. What's the worst that could happen? 20 years later. A young man stood walking slowly with his eyes closed. He had black spiky hair and a tail that traveled up to his waist. Not much had happened over the years since his arrival. His new parents made him have a normal childhood, but once I turned great ape, destroyed a city, and almost killed Uncle Ben, they realized it was not the case. My tail was cut off, but it grew back. Shield. I got their attention before that, and I had seen the men in black suits occasionally. I was glad I was met with the Ancient One first. Due to the fear of, me turning into a great ape and killing them, and the Ancient One to find them worthy. She decided to teach me the magic. I refused to let my tail be cut off again. My reaction was so strange it actually changed their minds. I was trained in various styles of meditation to try and control the beast within. Mom introduced me to several styles of yoga and mental training. I was able to learn chi for myself, and I was also able to learn magic from various masters. I had gotten stronger and stronger. During the years, I managed to gain enough mental power to use Akari in my human state, which didn't change much in my appearance. My eyes however turned yellow, as my hair spiked up like Goku normally would in Super Saiyan. This increased my power by a large margin, making me the strongest. But then again, I continued to train, and because there were no death fights with the Saiyans and everything, I barely received any Zenkai. I just continued to train and train and train, until this day. I continued to walk. I paused as something started to shimmer into existence. It was a wormhole. A small wormhole, but a wormhole nonetheless. Looking at it confused, I saw what I think to see, a beautiful woman with black hair and green skin-tight suit that hugged her form. I blinked in surprise. Hela? She didn't seem to hear me, as although she was bloodied and bruised, she was smiling, and eventually started to laugh like a maniac. I'm free. Marvel. My wife is Hela, goddess of death, just Saiyan. Chapter 1. Prologue. The last thing I remember was being a student in the University of Maryland, studying cybersecurity, before I woke up here, in the body of a baby in a spaceship. It was confusing, why, for the simple reason being that I was reborn, but I have no clue how I died. As a matter of fact, all I remember was blacking out. I don't even remember any important stuff. Only thing that was important was the fact that I was a nerd. Not really a nerd, just watched anime. I was somewhat of a loner too. I remember not even getting my first kiss. Other than that, everything was well. Later that day, it was then I realized that I was a Saiyan called Kakarot, as I figured out my ship's database, and was sent on the planet to kill all life. Yeah, not doing that, but it brings me so much joy that I was Goku from Dragon Ball. Eventually, I crash-landed into a planet called Earth. Earth, it was a beauty. Although I've never seen it up close in the atmosphere, it was much different than the online pictures. You can rest assured on that. The atmosphere was strong, and it was really hot. I traveled through the city, brushed past and damaged a couple of buildings before I crash-landed on an empty grassy field. It was a big feeling, but it was more uncomfortable than painful. Oh my gosh, Ben, look. There I heard gasps and people talking. May wait dash. But apparently, he went ignored. Wait, May. Just when I was about to make connections to the impossible, something went up. The hatchet opened up, and May gasped. I cried out in surprise as well. This was freaking Aunt May from the MCU, or so it's looked like at least. My eyes widened in shock. My mind was recalling all the buildings that I passed by, surprisingly without any crashes. But that's not. How can this be? It's a baby. May breathed. We both stared at each other. May eventually smiled. I blinked as she picked me up. Her hands were cold. Let's adopt him. Ben hesitated. May, I don't think that's a good idea. Oh hush. May said, eyes never meeting mine. He's alone, with no one to care for him. We could always hand him over to the orphanage. Possibly the government? Ben muttered, not really sure about having an alien as a son, and wondered if this whole thing will come and bite him in the ass. May shot him a look. Ben cringed, then sighed, as he looked at the baby once more. He noticed his eyes widened. A tail. What's wrong, Ben? May held too much amusement at his reaction. It's not like he's going to turn into a giant monkey and start smashing everything in its path. I almost snorted. Please don't tempt Murphy. Suddenly the image of gigantic monkeys the size of mountains flashed in Ben's mind. He gulped. It's settled. May said, her tone leaving no room for argument, and sounded very happy. She happily hoisting me up in the air. Andrew Parker. That's your name. Ben sighed, having an alien as a son. He looked at the kid and saw that May was making faces and baby noises at the kid, causing the kid to start laughing. He stared at the scene for a moment before warmth filled his body. Just maybe he could get used to this. He smiled. Having an alien as a son. What's the worst that could happen? 20 years later. A young man stood walking slowly with his eyes closed. He had black spiky hair and a tail that traveled up to his waist. Not much had happened over the years since his arrival. His new parents made him have a normal childhood, but once I turned great ape, destroyed a city, and almost killed Uncle Ben, they realized it was not the case. My tail was cut off, but it grew back. Shield. I got their attention before that, and I had seen the men in black suits occasionally. I was glad I was met with the Ancient One first. Due to the fear of, well, me turning into a great ape and killing them, and the Ancient One to find them worthy. She decided to teach me the magic. I refused to let my tail be cut off again. My reaction was so strange it actually changed their minds. I was trained in various styles of meditation to try and control the beast within. Mom introduced me to several styles of yoga and mental training. I was able to learn chi for myself, and I was also able to learn magic from various masters. I had gotten stronger and stronger. During the years, I managed to gain enough mental power to use Akari in my human state, which didn't change much in my appearance. My eyes, however, turned yellow, as my hair spiked up like Goku normally would in Super Saiyan. This increased my power by a large margin, making me the strongest. But then again, I continued to train, and because there were no death fights with the Saiyans and everything, I barely received any Zenkai. I just continued to train and train and train, until this day. I continued to walk. I paused as something started to shimmer into existence. It was a wormhole. A small wormhole, but a wormhole nonetheless. Looking at it confused, I saw what I think to see. A beautiful woman with black hair and green skin-tight suit that hugged her form. I blinked in surprise. Hela? She didn't seem to hear me, as although she was bloodied and bruised, she was smiling, and eventually started to laugh like a maniac. I'm free. Chapter 2. Hela. I'd advise you not to laugh like that. I said, you aren't exactly in private, so people will think you're insane. As soon as I said that, she suddenly stopped, slowly turned her head towards me. I smirked. I had to hand it to her. That motion was smooth as fuck. And you are? Cockroach. I said. Cockroach. She muttered. All right, Cockroach. What planet am I on? She asked. This clearly isn't Asgard. You are not on Asgard, I said. You are on Earth. Earth. Hela closed her eyes and smiled darkly. Ah, the foolish name the mortals here gave this planet. Fitting for this ball of dirt, though. She looked at him with a curious stare. So, Cockroach was it? She asked. Do you know who I am? You are Hela, the goddess of death from Norse mythology, sealed away a long time ago. Hela opened her eyes and smirked. Indeed, I am. She looked me up and down. You seem like a capable warrior. If you kneel before me now, and announce me as your queen, I could use your assistance. I raised my eyebrow at her. Aren't I just a puny mortal to you? You test my judgment? Hela raised an eyebrow. She raised her hand out and a blade appeared in her hands. Very well, we shall test your might and see if I am correct. I stared at her. Although I do love a good fight, I smirked. With the state you are in, I'm not sure that's a good idea. She lunged at me with blade in hand. I sidestepped and delivered a hard kick, thinking she would be a fun challenge. Unfortunately, I underestimated just how injured she was, which caused her to let out a painful gasp before she was sent tumbling to the ground. She coughed up blood. She was in pain, even more so than before when she escaped through her father's seal. She was also getting very angry. She was just testing this mortal, and yet he somehow was able to best her with a simple kick? Even in her injured state, she should be more than enough to defeat him with ease. Still though, this proved to her that she was right. He was different, far more powerful than the average Midgardian. She chuckles weakly. I raised my eyebrow. Something funny? She continues to chuckle before she smirks. For a Midgardian to be this strong, is indeed funny, Cockroach. She paused for a moment before she continued. You are indeed worthy enough to become my servant, but tell me, how did you get so strong? I smirked. Push-ups, sit-ups, and plenty of juice. Hela's lips quirked downwards. Why you lie? She snarled. No Midgardian is powerful enough to gain enough power you currently possess. She coughed up more blood. Yeah, no. I sent a small ki blast, knocking her head onto the ground unconscious. You're barely in any condition to continue this conversation any further. I walked over to pick up the injured death goddess. With a simple twitch of my fingers, orange sparks shimmered into an existence, forming into a small portal to a small room. It was something that he has been able to afford while he's in college. Chapter 3. Master Ancient. The second I came home, I put Hela gently onto the table and sighed as I sensed another key presence enter my apartment. Master Ancient. I greeted. What brings you to my humble abode? Andrew Parker. The familiar voice of the Ancient One greeted me. You know why I am here. The goddess of death. I looked to the woman who was unconscious on my table with a frown on my face. Indeed. I have things handled here, I said with another twitch of my hands. I raised my hands, which now started to glow an orange light before expanding, shifting to form a silent rope. It slithered like a snake towards Hela and entered her body, sealing all of her magic. I walked over to her and placed a gentle hand on her left arm. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I advise you not to do that. Master Ancient, if we don't she will surely die. I said, not looking from where Hela was. If Odin the All-Father of Asgard got a second chance, then I believe Hela can too, for they both were no different. I could feel Master Ancient frown. If you do this, any blood she spills will be on your hands. I accept. With that, the edges of his fingers glowed before the said glow transferred over to Hela, causing the edges of her own body to glow. Eventually, all of her injuries began to heal, though there was still blood on the table and on her body. He cleaned it up with a couple of rags before evaporating the rags himself. The Ancient One gives a sad smile before the portal opens up. Once again, she steps through and the portal closed. He looked back to Hela and noticed how extremely attractive she was. Of course she was always attractive, but actually seeing her up close. Damn, she is fine, he thought before he closed his eyes and cleared his thoughts. He sat in a meditative position and he waited for the time she awoke, which was right now, surprising him a little bit. Hela groaned as she stirred, before her eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes snapped open once she saw me. You! Warm greeting. I deadpanned. Is that any way to greet a person that just saved your life? Hela looked down and indeed, she saw that she was healed. She raised her hand to summon a blade, but to her surprise, she couldn't. Her magic was restricted, as was her powers. She glared at him. What did you do? I restricted your powers. I said plainly, for now you can't be trusted on the streets. However, prove me wrong and you'll have your powers back. She lunged at me, but I sidestepped, grabbed her by the wrists, and pinned her to the ground. Unfortunately, you can't beat me as you are now. I smirked at Hela's enraged look. I got off of her and offered my hand to her, which she slapped away. I shrugged. I give you a chance to become a servant, and this is how you repay me? Hela snarled. I will have my revenge for this humiliation. As soon as I break free from your bindings, I will have your head. I smirked. It's not so bad. You might end up falling in love with me. She scoffed. I admit you are quite the warrior, but what makes you think you are worthy of being my mate? I shrugged. I was joking. I'd rather not stick my dick in crazy. But time would tell, I guess. Comment. 8. Comment. Vote. Chapter 4. The Goddess of Death. Okay, first things first. I said, pinching the bridge of my nose. Go take a shower, Hela, you reek. I said to her. You don't tell me what to do, mortal. She snarled at me. We are going in public soon. My lips quirked downward into a frown. I can't have you going out in public like that. Why embarrassed? She smirked mockingly. I shrugged. Not really. Just trying to help you out, not really befitting for a princess of Asgard, you know. She put her hands on her knees and pushed herself up. I will need a spare of the best clothes fit for a royal goddess. It will be ready by the time you get done. I replied blankly. She scoffed and went off view, to where she assumed was the place I meant to clean herself. That is my bedroom. I replied, amused. She immediately changed directions, coming back into view with a clear scowl on her face. You peasant, point me in the direction of the cleaning room. What was it called? Bathroom. I replied, the amused smile never leaving my face. I pointed my thumb to the opposite direction. She immediately went off in that direction. My eyes traveled downwards to her ass as I watched it naturally sway as she walked. Once she was out of view, I whistled. Damn. I sat down and meditated. It was because of this I managed to be able to use my Ikari in my human form. Eventually, after more mental training, I was able to completely control the Ozaru with only a mountain destroyed and a couple of craters formed. I closed my eyes with a small sigh. Super Saiyan. It seems so far off. Maybe I should befriend Tony Stark and ask him to build a gravity chamber for me. I took a pause before I continued. Or maybe when it's the right time, steal the reality stone, so I can change the reality around me to increase the gravity on another planet. Midgardin. Hela's voice echoed throughout my room. Where's the cleansing powder? I blinked. What? Cleansing powder? Hela repeated. I don't see it here. We don't have that here. We have soap. Mortal, I do not know what this soap is. Explain at once. It's laying on the corner, I replied, amused. It's that yellow block made of animal fat. There was silence, before a sound of swallowing followed by an even louder spitting. Ugh, it takes nothing like what you just explained to me. I stifled a laugh. Did you just try to eat the bar of soap? Silence. Hela's voice roared. Now tell me, you said that this was a replacement to the cleaning powder we have on Asgard. Tell me, how am I supposed to put this on? You just put it on and rub it all over your body, I said with a deadpanned expression. Come here. I faltered for a second. Excuse me? I said. Come here, she snarled. You will show me at once. I refuse to be humiliated like this any longer. It's not even. I sighed. Fine, whatever. I walked over to bathroom and opened it, and just like I thought, Hela was in the shower, in the nude, and yes, she was perfect in every sense, on every part. She was looking at me with a raised eyebrow before she raised her hand with a bar of soap in hand. Mortal, she said, how do I put this on? You just hold it in place and put it on. I am still confused. Hela looked to her body, then back to the soap, then back to me. Well then, mortal, as your goddess, I command you to show me how it works, so then I would be able to know what you mean and do it by myself. I blinked. What? Are you an idiot? Hela snarled. I command you to show me how it works, so then I would be able to do it myself. Chapter 5. Awkward situations. Okay, so, I did ended up begrudgingly joining her in the shower, only because I was embarrassed about it, but I did it nonetheless. I wasn't a pussy. But to my surprise, Hela didn't mock my form. She stood silent, but her eyes traveled up and down my form real quickly, her eyes lingering to my meat stick, and my ass longer than all of my other parts. I used the soap and I showed her all of the ways of how to wash. Once I was done, I looked at her and blinked. Are you blushing? My words forcefully snapped her out of her daze. I am not. Really? My lips quirked upwards into a small smirk. That blush in your cheek says otherwise. I know how to handle myself now. She tried to push me out, but her powers were still restricted, so she couldn't hurt me at all. She glared at me. Leave at once. I chuckled before I stepped out. I gave out a tiny burst of magic, which caused all of the water on me and spilled onto the ground to dry up instantly. I closed my eyes and sighed. Before I opened my eyes, and in a flash, I was in a martial arts gi that was similar to Goku Black's version in DB Super. Magic materialization. I saw Hela staring at me. Once I locked eyes with her, she immediately looked away. I smirked before walking away. Once I got to the living room, I continued to sit in a meditation position. I am getting stronger? I glanced at my hands and clenched them tightly. This has continued to happen ever since I had met her. I closed my eyes. I ever had this particular feeling on rare occasions when I am dealing with near-death experience. My eyes snapped open as a spark of realization flashes in between them. No way. I muttered to myself. The Zenkai couldn't possibly activate around Hela just because she's a goddess of death, could she? Hela comes into view. Having been dried off, she stood before me, with her arms crossed under her breasts, making it bigger, also causing my eyes to linger a bit more on them. I glanced at her and saw that she was glaring at me. What? I demand that you give me some clothes. Hela growled. Oh. I raised 2 fingers and pointed at Hela, who suddenly tensed. A blinding beam of light shot from the tips of my fingers before impacting Hela's body, completely blinding her. Once the light died down, she was clad in a new outfit. She had a black jacket unzipped showing a dark green shirt. She had on black tights and an emerald green watch on wrist. She had dark green socks that went up to her ankles, and black Nike shoes with the Nike symbol colored green. She looked all right. I prefer Asgard clothing, but this would do. She gives off a satisfied look. I nodded to her. Good, because I am not changing it, I said, causing her to scowl. A twitch of my fingers later and another orange portal opened up. She raised an eyebrow. A sorcerer and a warrior? Makes life more fun and easier, I shrugged. Come on. Where are you taking me? Hela narrowed her eyes at me. Some sort of trap? I rolled my eyes, grabbed her by the wrists before she can even react, and yanked her inside. The portal closed a second later. Chapter 6. Aunt May. About time you got here, May said as she closed the book. The portal closed. If looks could kill, I'd be dead by now. She looked at me with a raised eyebrow. What took you so? She then spotted Hela. May looked back at me, then back at Hela, and instantly started to form connections. I sighed. It's not what it looks like. She grinned. Oh, I'm sure. She looked at Hela up and down, completely ignoring the scowl on her face. Absolutely perfect for my baby. What's your name, dear? Hela simply glared at my mother and remained silent. Her name is Hela, I said. Ah, May smiled. Well, that certainly is a unique name. Not many parents would name her after the goddess of death from Norse mythology. She is the goddess of death from Norse mythology. Funny. She laughed, but when she saw that I wasn't amused in the slightest, nor was Hela's glare turned irritated, she began to realize that I was not joking. She paled. A word if you will, dear. She sent a nervous look at Hela. Excuse me. May pulled me aside. Have you lost your mind? I tilted my head. What? If that's truly the goddess of death, what is she doing out of her seal? And why did you bring her here? I'm surprised you believe me so quickly. I said bluntly, I thought you would mock me because I'm denial or something. Child, I found you inside an alien spaceship. May deadpanned. I can do this. She opened her hands in the air and sparks of orange magic appeared into the existence for a split second. Before fading, catching Hela's attention, she stared at May with a weird expression on her face. Hel, our own teacher of the mystic arts, is over 500 years old. At first I thought you were joking, but when I saw the serious expression on your face, I knew you weren't. Point taken. I sighed, scratching the back of my head. As for why I wanted her here, well, I wanted to give her a second chance. She wasn't exactly given a fair trial when she was sealed for a couple thousand years. Dear, you know what she has done, May said worriedly. You know what could happen if Dad. You know. I interrupted her. From what I've heard, the only reason why Hela was the way she is, was because her father raised her like that. I gave a brief glance to Hela before looking back at my mother. She was raised to be Odin's tool for conquest, but he suddenly decided that he wanted to be good and expected his daughter to do the same. May sighed. I understand where you're coming from, son, but at the end of the day, she still is the way she is. She could turn on us and kill us with ease with the power that she has. Her eyes flickered nervously to Hela before going back to me. Change takes time, son. She could kill us at any given moment. That's why I restricted her powers, I replied, making May look up with a raised eyebrow. That explains everything. I shrugged. Anyway, what was this emergency you wanted me to talk to you about? May sighed tiredly. It's about Peter. Chapter 7. Grim Revelations. What about him? I asked with a raised eyebrow. His parents came by a couple of weeks ago. Apparently they had an important business trip to take care of, so they left me in charge of Peter. May flinched at the serious tone of my voice as he used her tone, and my face was more serious than she's ever seen me be. They said they'd be back in a week but never came, she continued. A week passed, followed by 2. I tried calling them with the phone but no one answered. May, why didn't you tell me this when this happened? I said with a frown on my face. She swallowed. I thought they were fine. At my look she flinched again. I thought that they just didn't use the phone properly. I didn't know what. Mom, I said softly, you're lying to me. She flinched again for the 3rd time, but this one was a lot more violent than the other times. Tell me the truth, I said. What happened? She swallowed, and began to tell me everything that happened. From my uncle and aunt working for the government, they discovered something that wasn't meant to be discovered. Something happened. That's when they decided to leave, but before they did they decided bring their son Peter here, so May and Uncle Ben can take care of it. May and Ben was swore secrecy not to tell anyone. I closed my eyes and searched for their signature across the world. I could normally find them but I could not. I opened my eyes. Could you find them? She asked. My grim expression told her everything. Her expression fell and she began to cry softly. I hugged her tightly. Peter's parents, I have grown to love over time, as they had me. I wanted to save them. I had plans to save them. I even told my mother to tell me if a situation like this ever happens. While I am disappointed that they didn't tell me, I understand why. Hela frowned as she stared at what she was seeing in front of her, conflicting feelings that were always within her growing. She knew a warrior when she sees one. How could a warrior with such strength be so kind and caring? She gazed upon him and watched as I consoled May and wrapped my arms around her. Hela closed her eyes. She was a feared goddess of death. She was made to rule and to conquer, but deep down inside of her, she wondered if she'd ever find someone worthy enough. As she looked up, she saw it, his arms wrapped around the Midgardian woman. She wondered what it would be like if she was in her place. She shook her head out of her daze and scowled. I broke the hug, glanced up as I spotted a key signature coming down. I recognized this as Peter Parker. "Hey, Pete." His eyes were watering, so he must have heard the whole thing. He swallowed. "Are my parents really gone?" "No." I smiled softly. "Your parents are never gone, they live on." He pointed at Peter's heart. "In there," I told him. "Always remember that." Chapter 8. Hela's Anger. After that revelation, the four of us sat down. Peter looked up at Hela, who was looking up at him with a scowl with his head tilted slightly. "Who's the scary lady?" he asked, looking at Hela curiously, causing her to glare at him. "You insolent child, Dath." "Hela." My voice said, warning, "Be nice." She glared at me. I glared back, my eyes flashing golden for a split second. "Ikari." Causing Hela to flinch slightly, she swallowed, before she looked back at the boy. "My name is Hela, child." "Like the goddess from Norse mythology?" Hela smiled cruelly. "Exactly. We learned about it in mythology class." Peter rambled on excitedly. "I always liked Thor better though." Hela's eyebrow twitched. "I have no idea who this Thor is. Child, explain." "Thor is supposed to be Hela's younger brother, and current heir to the throne." Peter explains, much to May's pride at what Peter learned in school, and Hela's growing anger. "He's the god of thunder and lightning." Hela clenched her fist so tightly that it drew blood. I put a hand on Hela's shoulder and squeezed it for comfort. She looked up and saw my eyes held a look of concern. Even Peter looked scared and confused, a little bit worried because he spotted blood trickling down Hela's hand. Hela looked around and saw everyone's concern and feared look. She took a deep breath and walked out. I followed her. Peter was still not only slightly scared, but had a look of confusion on his face. Did I say something wrong? May hugged him tightly. "No, child, it's not your fault." "You're hurting," I said softly. "I do not need your pity, cockroach," Hela growled. "Leave at once." "Hey, I am just checking on you to make sure you okay." "Why do you care?" Hela snarled. "Why do you care so much about me when nobody else did?" I raised my eyebrow and smiled. "Now we are getting somewhere." She growled and lunged at me. Instead of hurting her, I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into my chest. She struggled. "Let go of me this instant." "Not until you explain to me why are you hurting." I said to her. "You'd be surprised at how wise I can be." I squeezed her tighter. Hela didn't understand why she was feeling this way. Any other males would or have tried would have been killed with their balls ripped off of their bodies. But this mortal, he's different. Hela could not explain it, but every time she is near him, she feels this weird feeling in her soul. She decided to trust him for now, and tell him what happened and how she felt. I did everything for father." Hela snarled. "He raised me to be a conqueror like him, and we conquered together. Everything that I have ever done, he has done worse." I listened and watched as Hela finally told me everything, about her past, about her relationship with her father, up until the point where she was free. "I'll kill him. I'll kill him and his pathetic excuse for son for daring to betray me and seal me away. All because I had more ambition than him." Hela roared, tears finally trickling down her cheeks. I stared at her. This woman. She's been through so much. I honestly didn't know what to say at this point. I just hugged her tightly for comfort. Chapter 9. The best form of revenge? "Hela," I muttered. "I am sorry you had to go through that." Hela was silent. We were now sitting silently with Hela on my lap. She was leaning against me. I looked to Hela, who was now silent, before my eyes lit up. I looked to Hela with a grin. "Look, Hela. Why not, instead of killing your father or your brother, how about lose all interest in them?" Hela closed her eyes. "I cannot do that, cockroach. In case you have heard or understood nothing of what I just admitted to you, my entire life was based around the throne of Asgard. I was raised and bred to be a tool for my father, to be a conqueror who would one day surpass him as ruler, only to be betrayed." She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. "Thousands of years of being sealed, I have thought of nothing but revenge. And now you're saying not to care at all? I should kill you where you stand for daring to speak such insolence." I smiled sheepishly. "That's not what I mean at all, Hela. I'm not saying you can't kill Odin for what he's done to you. I mean Odin is probably worried about you, right? His biggest fear besides, well, Ragnarok." I saw slight fear in Hela's eyes for a second. "Is you coming out of your seal, killing him, and taking over Asgard?" There was a silence. Hela frowned. I still do not understand. Odin cares deeply for Asgard, and expects all of his children to do the same, including you. I explained, instead of setting your sights on Asgard, maybe try not to care at all. Don't give the slightest. Don't help when they need it, even when they come crying and begging, because that would be the biggest slap in the face Odin ever had. Hela's face grew thoughtful. Eventually a cruel smirk formed onto her face. The image of her bitch slapping her father in the face appeared in her mind. I do like the sound of that. Besides, you know what's even more of a revenge? I asked. Hela raised an eyebrow. Having a Midgardian as a mate. Hela scoffed. Don't speak such nonsense. I grinned. I could see the slight blush on her cheeks. I chuckled. I don't know, Hela. The way you are leaning against me speaks very suggestively. Hela immediately let go of me, and stood up, her face a shade darker. I started to laugh. Quite. She hissed. You will tell no one of this cockroach. I rolled my eyes. Yeah, your majesty. I said in a joking tone, causing her to scowl. Come on, let's head back, my mother is probably worried. Chapter 10. The Beast Within. I got up slowly and cracked my neck before I smiled at Hela and turned to walk back. Hela stared at me for a moment, before she followed me. I hope everything is okay now. Mom said with a smile. I nodded and smiled, but Hela's expression remained neutral. She didn't say a word. May looked at Hela and sighed. Her son was right. Hela does deserve a second chance. Everything that Hela has done was only seen in one perspective. It only showed her father's reasons for sealing her, and how evil she was. It takes time to change. You can't change a person in a short moment, who was raised to be a conqueror and a genocidal maniac, just like her father was. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She decided. She was going to help out Hela as well, and if things go wrong, she knows that her son will step in. Suddenly a loud roar was heard. Hela quickly got in a stance. Her hands opened as if she was trying to reveal her weapons, but nothing appeared. Cockroach, she seethed. I need my powers back this instant. Otherwise we are all doomed by this oncoming beast. I tried not to feel embarrassed about it, so my expression remained neutral. However, you could see a small blush on my cheeks from embarrassment. May couldn't help but let out a snicker. The beast is hungry. You better watch out. May said in a playful tone, causing me to roll my eyes. Hela looked irritated, appalled. Cockroach, why is your mother making a mockery of this? By the sound of the roar, the beast is mighty, and will doom us all if you do not give me back what's mine. This is no laughing matter. I sighed, because Hela, that is not a beast. That is my stomach. I rubbed my belly. Hela looked at it confused. It means he's hungry. Peter explained to Hela nervously. Hela looked at him, then to my stomach. She looked at my embarrassed look. Hela scowled, though you could see a blush of embarrassment emerge on her cheeks. May couldn't help it. She started to laugh uproariously. After a few seconds to a minute she managed to calm down. Well, the beast will be happy to know that I had already prepared a meal fit for just him. She smirked. That is if Hela won't mind joining in? Hela glared at her, but her stomach also roared, though it wasn't as mighty as mine. It was pretty mighty. Hela's blush turned darker. May's smirk grew. I'll take that as a yes. Well, come on then, it should be ready right about now. I smiled as I walked towards her. I'll help set it up. May's lips shifted into a smile. Thank you, dear. Hela was staring in a mixture of shock at how much was on the table. Of course Asgardians are similar fashion, but what she is seeing now pales in comparison. By a large margin. In fact, in this entire table, is big enough for it to be an entire banquet in Asgard. May smiled. All that's left is for us to say prayers and thanks. Hela didn't care about that. It was a mortal thing to pray to higher beings. But what she didn't know was that they didn't just pray to any higher being, they prayed to the one above all, who watches them with great interest. Grab hands, everyone. May said cheerfully, and we all did what was told. I offered my hand to Hela, who stared at it hesitantly for a long moment, before she slowly raised her own and took it. I closed my eyes. One above all, who is in the highest above high, thank you for letting me into this life. Thank you for giving me this family. And most importantly, thank you for giving me this world to live on. Amen. 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 May I and Peter said at the same time, as we began to dig in. Chapter 11. Disgusted Fascination. Hela didn't know whether to feel impressed or disgusted with the way Cockroach was eating. The fact that he was eating at such speeds that even most Asgardians find trouble doing. Hela watched in disgusted fascination, as she saw Kakarot eat the entire banquet by himself. His mannerisms were just like the warriors from Valhalla. Before she killed them, of course. If not worse, was he really a Midgardian, or was he an Asgardian decent, because she was certain that no Midgardian could ever eat this much and live. Unless of course she was wrong, and he was actually not a Midgardian but an Asgardian who was abandoned. That could be possible. You do plan on marrying my son, right? May asked, causing me to choke violently on my food. You'll have to get used to him eating like this. Maybe I'll show you tips on how to cook for him, unless Asgardians already know, do they? Hela grunted. I had no interest in such nonsense. Everything I had ever sought after was the throne of Asgard and conquest. And Mom, Hela and I just met, I sighed. I will not be engaged to someone that I had just met a couple hours ago. Close your mouth before you chew, dear. May said, and what does that matter to Hela, dear? I am sure if Hela likes you, then there is nothing stopping her from making you hers. I slurped up the noodles like lightning. Ugh, you know Aunt May, you said get used to this. I don't think I ever will. Peter mumbled. May giggled. As I told Hela, only time will tell. I answered May before I took the entire pizza, and dumped it in my mouth in one go, chewing really fast before swallowing. I moved on to the chicken. May grinned. Oh, so you are interested in her? She's attractive. I said a shrug. And I sort of like her attitude, she's feisty. May asked, a smirk on her face. You like feisty women? Strong woman. I corrected with a smile. Hela is very strong, so I wouldn't mind, but like I said and keep saying, it takes time to marry. Hela was silent throughout all of this. She was thinking about it as well. He is a Midgardian, which would automatically make him unworthy in her eyes, but after thinking it through, being strong enough to best her with a simple kick, restraining her of all of her magic and abilities, he had already proven himself to be stronger. Hela's eyes gazed at my form. Her eyes flashed back to the shower incident, taken in his nude form that was dripping wet from the water. That form was a form that she hadn't seen in even Asgardians, or in anything she had seen or conquered. It was either too much muscles to where it was disgusting, or too skinny for them to be weak. The more and more Hela thought this over, the more and more Kakarot was beginning to prove worthy in her eyes. Her cheeks turned slightly pink, but she gazed back at the food. She obviously would never admit this to him though. Unfortunately for her though, May caught the blush Hela had. She smirked. Ooh, looks like Hela agrees with you, dear, if the blush on her cheeks is anything to go by. Hela's blush turned darker as she scowled, before taking her first bite. Her eyes widened in shock, before she gave out an involuntary moan. Chapter 12. Smashing. After everything was finished, which took a couple of minutes, I now stood up with Hela beside me with her arms crossed over her face. She seemed to be having an indifferent look on face, but if you look closer, you could see that her expression had softened considerably, especially when she was talking to my cousin Peter Parker. It was a rocky relationship at first, but slowly she began to soften, and told him about her more nicer adventures. She even told him of her pet, you know, the big scary wolf thing, you know, Fairer, the creature that fought against the Hulk in Ragnarok. All for one, it made me curious. Her followers are sworn to follow her throughout the ways of life. If all they did was follow her, then they didn't deserve to be sealed either. Are you sure you don't want to spend the night? May asked softly. I'm sure Pete would love to have you. I smiled as my fingers twitched slightly. An orange portal appeared behind me. Maybe next time, Mom. Tell Dad I said hi. I stepped through it, followed by Hela. The portal closed soon after, and I instantly had a disgusted look on my face. Fucking hell, dude, I thought we made it clear no fucking on my couch. Yes, what I see before me is my roommate and his girlfriend, both really good friends that had been with me since I met them in Kamaj Tar, making out on my favorite couch. The girl on top of him, cowgirl style. They instantly broke apart, huge blushes on their faces. Bruh, I didn't dash. While I am glad to see you are finally together, can you at least tell me before you start this? And can you not do this on the couch? Wait. The girl responded. You knew that, Dad. That Jason had feelings for you. Yes, I did. I deadpanned. I knew about it since middle school. Now get off my couch. Okay. The girl raised her hands in surrender and slowly got up. The now named Jason got up, but then he spotted Hela. His eyes widened. I sighed. Oh, here we go again. Oh, thank God. I thought you were gay. Jason sighed in relief thinking about the beautiful women that tried to get with Andrew, but he didn't show the slightest interest. I hate you. No you don't. Jason grinned. So have you smashed yet? I glared at him. No. Oh yes, we indeed smashed, Hela said. The three of us looked at her in surprise, not expecting a response. Oh really, the girl grinned. How was he? Kimberly. I warned. Very impressive, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. In such a short time, he managed to dominate me completely, and I was forced to submit to his will. Jason and the name Kimberly's jaws dropped to the ground. I glanced at Hela nervously. Hela? I don't dash. Silence, mortal. Hela looked at me with a frown. I do not understand why you must try and hide such an impressive feat. It is not something to be ashamed of. He was that good? Kimberly asked, shocked. Hela grunted. Indeed, but when I am back at my full strength, I would be the one smashing. After she said that, there was a sudden silence that swept through the room. Eventually Jason was the first person to regain his composure. Wow, while I am shocked you had it in you, I have to say, congrats dude. Jason grinned, but you better watch your back. Your girl said she will be the one on top next time. I groaned. Chapter 13. One small step. Kimberly frowned for a moment, as she remembered what I and Hela said. Mortal, Hela? Kimberly gazed at Hela with an odd look. She could also feel Andrew's signature too, like he was restricting hers. Babe. Jason asked, concerned. What's wrong? Hela also noticed Kimberly looking at her with an odd expression, but she didn't say something. What could a few mortals do? Even if they were Kakarot's companions, it was impossible for them to be as strong as him. You're not mortal, are you? She asked with narrowed eyes. What are you, and why are you here? Hela smirked coldly at her. I'm impressed that you've actually managed to figure it out, mortal. Her cold voice sent shivers down her spine, as Hela's eyes looked like they were looking into her very soul, placing judgment. As for who I am the goddess of death. There was a slight pause in her voice. She closed her eyes as she remembered what I said not long ago. Flashback. Start. Look, Hela. Why not, instead of killing your father or your brother, how about lose all interest in them? Hela closed her eyes. I cannot do that, Kakarot. In case you have heard or understood nothing of what I just admitted to you, my entire life was based around the throne of Asgard. I was raised and bred to be a tool for my father, to be a conqueror who would one day surpass him as ruler, only to be betrayed. She took a deep breath and opened her eyes. Thousands of years of being sealed, I have thought of nothing but revenge. And now you're saying not to care at all? I should kill you where you stand for daring to speak such insolence. I smiled sheepishly. That's not what I mean at all, Hela. I'm not saying you can't kill Odin for what he's done to you. I mean Odin is probably worried about you, right? His biggest fear besides, well, Ragnarok. I saw slight fear in Hela's eyes for a second. Is you coming out of your seal, killing him, and taking over Asgard? There was a silence. Hela frowned. I still do not understand. Odin cares deeply for Asgard, and expects all of his children to do the same, including you. I explained, instead of setting your sights on Asgard, maybe try not to care at all. Don't give the slightest. Don't help when they need it, even when they come crying and begging, because that would be the biggest slap in the face Odin ever had. Flashback. End. She opened her eyes. Maybe Kakarot was right. Though it will be difficult to get rid of all desire, she will try, starting with her birthright. She looked at them and did not say anything else. While my friends looked on with confusion, I smiled proudly at her. I knew what she was going to say, future queen of Asgard and heiress to the throne. Though on the outside, it wasn't much. For me though, I knew this took a lot for her to do. This was a small step. But it was one giant leap for Hela. Chapter 14. Awkward moments. You're really Hela, the goddess of death? Jason asked. His eyes immediately landed on me. How did you end up snagging such a woman? Excuse you? Just what are you trying to say? Kimberly asked, causing Jason to flinch. I mean, you're the only one for me, babe, Jason quickly defended himself. I just mean, because she is the goddess of death, how has she not killed you by now? We didn't fuck, Jason, it was a fucking fight. I growled. I kicked her ass and we were done. Jason muttered, now feeling like an idiot. So, the whole thing about her being dominated Wasn't actually about sex, yes. I nodded. That makes so much sense. Kimberly sighed, scratching the back of her head. Sorry, Andrew. Caught up in the moment. Hela frowned. Andrew. Who is that, or what is that? Another beast, or a type of food? Kimberly shot her a weird look. Jason snickered. Some type of food, funny. Who would have thought the goddess of death would be this innocent? Kimberly sighed. Jason, she opened her eyes. Jason smiled sheepishly. Hela scowled, cockroach. The only reason you were able to best me as easily as you did was because I was in a heavily injured state. She glared at me. I assure you, once I break free from these chains you and I will fight again. And this time, I will be the victor in our battle. I chuckled. I look forward to it. You're insane. Kimberly deadpanned. And yet you're still here. I replied with a blank tone, causing Hela to smirk. Harsh dude. Jason mocked sarcastically. Real. OW, what the fuck dash. Jason looked down at what hit him and picked it up. He looked at me with a shocked look. Did you just throw a peanut at me? Yes. Oh fuck you. Sorry, I responded blandly. Not into dudes. Kimberly giggled. Sorry, you walked right into that one. I hate you both. Jason grumbled. I'm gonna get something to eat. He glared at Hela. Don't cause any trouble. Hela ignored Jason, causing him to roll his eyes. Whatever. He walked up to Kimberly before pecking her on the lips. If you need me, I'll be in the kitchen. He walked off, leaving the two of us to stare at each other awkwardly. So. Kimberly muttered. So. I muttered back. Hela gazed at us for a moment, before scoffing and going off to somewhere. I memorized her key signature so I could just teleport to her via portal anytime I want. Look. I started. About before? Don't. Kimberly sighed. I know what you did to me was harsh. But honestly, it was something that I needed. Obsessive idolization is wrong. I nodded. Somewhere in the past where I have met Kimberly, she seemed to have something of a huge crush on me. Although she was different from those fangirls, and was very discreet about it, I did not feel comfortable about dating a young girl as I was not a pedo even if my body was young. Obviously she didn't know about this, but it rubbed her the wrong way. We made up for it, of course, and she said she would try and move on, but I could still tell she still held slight attraction towards me. There was another moment of silence that passed through the room. You and Jason, I muttered. I'm happy for you too. You make a great couple, better than you and I ever could. Kimberly smiled sadly, thanks. Followed by third moment of awkward silence. Well, Kimberly muttered, this is awkward. I chuckled. Chapter 15. Intermission. So do you want anything to eat, or? I shook my head. No man, I and Hela already ate. Okay, good. Hela is a goddess, so if her appetite is anything like yours then I couldn't possibly feed the both of you. Kimberly smirked, causing me to roll my eyes. My eyes went to Hela, who was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She was gazing at the nothingness with a contemplated look on her face. Kimberly smiled. You know, if you plan on letting Hela stay here then you are going to have to share a mattress when you sleep. I raised my eyebrow as I glanced back at her. Yeah, I figured that out. You spending the night over? Kimberly smirked. Nah, if I spend only one night her my idiot would most likely throw a fit. I'm here to stay. Helping with the bills? I asked with a raised eyebrow. I have a job, and so does Jason. I know you do. So. Kimberly rolled her eyes, of course. Both of our eyes glanced over to Hela. Does the master know about her? I nodded. Yes, Master Enceinte confronted me about her a couple hours earlier today. Did she? Kimberly trailed off, as she knew how paranoid her master can be sometimes when threats like Hela appear on Earth. I nodded, but I refused. She said any blood she spills would be on my hands, if I did. And? You accepted it? Kimberly asked incredulously. I nodded my head. You're insane. Hela deserves a second chance. I said, I believe all Hela needs is time, but eventually she could change too, just like her father. Kimberly stared at me for a long moment. What? Nothing. Kimberly muttered, it's nothing. All right. Jason's cheerful voice came from the kitchen. He walked over. Hela, you need a tour. All of us will give you one. Hela ignored him and looked at me. I smiled at her. He's right. You basically know nothing of our world. I know enough. Hela scoffed, causing me to raise another eyebrow. You'd be surprised at how much things have changed since you last visited Midgard before you were sealed. If I recall, Hela smirked, the only thing that was of most surprise to me was the power you held. Other than that, she looked up and down at Jason and Kimberly, analyzing them like they were ants beneath her boot. Fuck, Jason sighed. I just met you and you are already judging me. I smirked, Jason. So far you are just a lowly mortal in her eyes. The point these two are trying to make is that you need to be aware of your surroundings. Kimberly smiled. Come on, Hela, I grinned. One tour wouldn't hurt, especially with a goddess of your statue. Hela closed her eyes before she opened them. She got off of the wall and slowly walked towards me till we were face to face. You have a point, mortal, she said. Very well. I shall accept this tour of Midgard you mortals are so insistent on giving me. I smiled. Jason leaned into my ear with a megawatt grin and whispered, one step closer to fuck the goddess of death. I elbowed him harshly, causing him to cough and bend over. ACH. The fuck man. Kimberly giggled while Hela scoffed. I completely ignored Jason. Let's get going. Chapter 16. Tour. What is this? Hela asked as she followed us to my car. It wasn't much, just a custom-made crimson Camaro with black flames on the back. Firefly. I said, isn't she a thing of beauty? I pushed the button on my keys in my pocket, causing the headlights to flash twice as if it was a living creature that heard my response. He keeps saying that, but I think it looks ugly, Jason commented, earning a slap to the back of the head by Kimberly. I ignored his blasphemous words and caressed the car gently. Who's the sexy girl? Yes, you are. I cooed. Hela looked at it with a conflicted look. There was a certain feeling that she was feeling again, ever since she saw Kakarot talking with the Midgardian female. She hated it. It's cute when you're jealous. I smirked. Hela scowled. I am not jealous, Kakarot. I do not care about who you mortals decide to love or not. I could hear Jason snickering in the background. I rolled my eyes. Hela, it has no feelings nor does it have a soul. It's an object mainly for human transport, very similar to Asgard's ships. Hela was embarrassed slightly, she tried not to show it. But if you look closely you could see the blush on her cheeks. And to answer your unanswered question, I said with a smile, I don't really need it. I just use it for fun. Now let's get going. To my surprise, Jason and Kimberly were enough to stay out of our way when we did the tour. I was the one telling everything about everything. It was funny to see Hela actually taking everything in at once. She realized that yes, things are indeed different than the last time she visited Midgard a couple thousand years ago. You mortals have changed during the time that I sealed away, Hela said with an indifferent look. This is impressive. It also makes me wonder how much Asgard has changed. I looked at her sadly, already knowing that it probably changed a little bit, but the appearance changes were different and much bigger than that of Asgard. Have you Midgardians made it to the stars? Hela asked. I smiled sheepishly. We made it to the moon. As I expected, Hela did not look impressed. I rolled my eyes. Look, we did what we could with what we had, all right? Hela scoffed. Then I should have expected nothing better of this planet. I smiled at her. You know, we have many accomplishments here on Midgard, you'd be surprised. Hela snorted. I've seen enough. I doubt anything on Midgard could surprise anymore. Don't be so sure, I smiled. We might surprise you. Chapter 17. Date? Shotgun. Oh no. I grabbed his wrists. This time, Hela will sit next to me. You and Kimberly will need to sit in the back. What? He looked at me like I just told him his dog died. It was pretty dramatic for such a stupid rejection. Are you seriously going to do that to me, man? At my look he rolled his eyes. Ah, whatever, go spoil your girl. He opened the back door for Kimberly, who smiled at him and walked in. He sat down. Kimberly climbed onto Jason's lap and leaned against him as he buckled his seat belt around the both of them. Hela looked at it confused, but she wasn't an idiot like Thor was. After seeing what they were doing, she bent her legs and climbed inside. My eyes widened at what she was actually doing. She was climbing over the gears to the chair where I was sitting, and she sat on my lap. Hela, what are you doing? Is this not what we are supposed to do? Hela asked with a confused look. Oh yes, this is exactly what you are supposed to do. Jason grinned. I glared at him once again. He was enjoying my embarrassment way too much. Not to mention the way she shifted in my lap went against my balls. Felt good. Also I was embarrassed, but no matter how embarrassed I was no pussy. I let it happen. I gave one last glare to Jason. promising revenge, before I turned on my car and took off. The tour around Queens went better than I expected it to go, honestly. Of course I knew how Thor reacted, but Hela is a different person entirely. She was different, much more graceful than Thor? I mean, I realized this the moment Hela didn't seem to slam the plate of food down and scream out another. Which would be hilarious, by the way, and would give me awesome flashbacks watching the Thor movie in my previous world. Also, my mother wouldn't need to worry about broken glass because with magic, she can always fix it. Bro, let's go on a double date, Jason said. Jason, I sighed, I have told you 1,000 times. I will not date a person that I've just met a couple of hours ago. It's unrealistic in love. Maybe in marriage, Jason replied cheekily. But not if it's just a date, that's rather common. I shot Jason a blank look. Jason, that's a one-way ticket to get your heart screwed over. Oh come on, Hela's innocent enough. Maybe things will be different. Jason smiled. I sighed, Hela, how do you feel about a date? Hela looked at me confused. I do not understand. I am unsure of the date. I do know it has been 1,000 years since I have been sealed. Jason grinned at me, see? Innocent. I glared at him, before sighing he has a point. I turned to face Hela. Hela, a date is to get to know a person before deciding whether a person wants to be a mate or not. I explained, it's a Midgardian thing. I see. Hela glared at me. That's very bold of you to ask a goddess of death. I should kill you for this insolence, however. However? I asked. I am interested. Hela blushed slightly. I wish to try it out. Chapter 18. Preparations. Double date it is then. Jason. Kimberly yelled, this is their first date. They should only be with each other. Shut up and let them be. But what Kim said. I said, nodding my head in slight agreement. No idiots allowed. Jason's eyebrow twitched in slight irritation. I am not an idiot. Kimberly smiled. Yes, you are. Jason shot her a hurt look, but Kimberly kissed his cheek. My idiot, she cooed. Now shut up and let them have their date. Jason sighed, before he rolled his eyes and narrowed them at me, whispering, you will tell me the details, right? Jason. No. I will not be banging the goddess of death on my first date. I deadpanned. It wouldn't surprise me if you do, Jason blinked. Okay, I lied. It will surprise me, still though. Jason. Fine. Jason opened up a portal. Hela looked at it in surprise. He picked up Kimberly and went through. The portal closed. I rolled my eyes. At least Kim had enough sense to leave us be. Do all Midgardians have this type of sorcery? Hela asked curiously. I shook my head. No, just a selected few. I drove back home and lifted Hela out of the car before setting her back down. The two of us walked into the apartment. Once we did though, I raised my 2 fingers and pointed it at Hela, who was a bit tense at my sudden action. What is it? A blinding light shot from my fingers straight towards Hela at blinding speeds. Once the beam impacted her, she was enveloped in a bright light, before the light began to fade, revealing Hela dressed in a much more different form of dress. Since it was Hela, I decided my first date clothing would be like I was dressed like a god would, while I allowed Hela to dress up in a sleeveless midnight black dress that hugged her form. It looked very similar to those ruby red dresses you see some of the celebrities wear on the red carpet, but instead of ruby residential it was midnight black. Her skirt, however, did not drag on the ground. It stopped below her knees. Her hair matched her dress, perfectly moist. It went down to her shoulders in waves, as a bang covered her left eye. She looked down on herself before she smirked at me. Now this is much more befitting of a goddess of death. I do not understand why you did not do this instead of what I wore before. Because my lovely goddess, I said, causing her to slightly blush at the way I said it. I smirked. Hela was so adorable at times, because she was just so innocent. It made me want to protect her from anything, even if she can handle herself. These type of clothing is only for special occasions. Hela scoffed. I do not understand your point. My mere presence should be considered the most special of all occasions to you. Oh, it was something I did not expect would ever happen for a long while. I grinned. But that was a different surprise. I am talking about something else. I see. Hela muttered. I closed my eyes and in a flash of light, I found myself in another pair of clothes. This one was a midnight black tuxedo that matched Hela's. My hair was smoothed out into a different style, pulled all the way back into a man tail, with bangs coming down my face as well, too. I looked in a mirror, and to my surprise, I actually looked good, not weird, and if Hela's blush is anything to go by, I was correct. Well then, I said in a voice that resembled SSJ3 Goku, which is something I never really did. This caused a shiver to go down Hela's spine and her blush to grow deeper. Shall we get going, my lady? She looked at my arm, and stared at it for a long moment, before she hesitantly looped her arm with mine. Very well. Chapter 19. Date 1. The moment we walked into the building, all eyes were on us. None of us cared. We walked as if everything was completely fine, which it was. Hela was very similar to her comic book and the MCU counterpart. She had the best traits of both of them, so she would turn heads no matter where she goes, plus she knows she is attractive. With me, I am buff as hell, but not buff to a point where it's disgusting. Not only am I handsome, I am also tall, very tall. So I would attract a lot of attention because everyone around me seems skinny? Well, either skinny or fat. How may I help you? The receptionist asked with a slight stutter, blushing at the sight of me. We would like to go see Fast and Furious? She fumbled for a minute. Before she managed to get tickets, she handed to me. As I gave her my credit card, she swiped before she handed it back to me. Enjoy the movie. She stuttered slightly. I nodded, thank you. I glanced at Hela and smiled. Are you ready, my lady? The receptionist glared at Hela with envy. Hela saw it, but she didn't acknowledge it. To her, the receptionist was nothing but a lowly ant that she could crush beneath her boot at any given moment. So what is this movie? Is it any similar to theater in Asgard? Hela asked. This is more advanced than that. I smirked. Hela scoffed. She did not believe me. She believed Asgard to be superior in every way. Mortals can dream. She smirked. So far the only thing that is different than the plays in Asgard. There is no light. She looked around. I do not see why this is needed. It enhances the picture to get a better experience. I explained to her. Hela was confused. Picture? What better picture is reality? The moment Hela said those words, the screen came to life. Hela could not remember the last time she'd been this annoyed before. Ah yes, it was when her father betrayed her and sealed her for 1,000 years. At first she thought of the why. Then, all she could ever think about was revenge. Revenge for what her father could do now. Now? She was annoyed and angry for a different reason entirely. Hela could barely hear herself think, and the picture on the screen was so bright, everything came alive at once, and she screamed out in surprise. With her instinct taken in, she lunged at the screen, but my reaction was on point. As soon as she jumped up out of her chair and lunged at the screen, I grabbed her by the wrists and pulled her back. I wrapped my arms around her waists and pulled her into my chest. Kakar. I covered her mouth with my hand. Her reaction was so dramatic, it gathered the attention of the people in the room. I put my hand on her shoulder. She looked into my eyes. She slowly began to relax. I cannot hear my own thoughts. Hela growled. I nodded. Yeah, my first time was like that too. I could barely remember it, but what I could clearly remember was how frightened I was at the noise. Breathe and relax. You'll get used to it, to a point where you might just like it. Chapter 20. Date 2. /N. Star Wars will be changed to Fast and Furious simply because I was stupid. I forgot a certain aspect that wouldn't make sense in the story, so I changed it. It's humiliating, so please don't ask what. The date was surprisingly smooth, confusing for Hela, but the more and more she watched it, she became enraptured. Asgard was nothing like this. The theater was never shown in such detail such as this, and the acting, it was like it was reality. At first, Hela wanted to murder this son of a coner, but later on it became to be this mess that fixed itself in the most intriguing way. I watched Hela with interest as she went through a torrent of emotions throughout the movie. Brian's infiltration of Dom's ring soon becomes corrupted by his fascination with the culture Dom and his crew have created. It's a culture that specializes in prompting and maintaining a long-term adrenaline rush in the most unique and heart-pounding ways. Despite Brian's responsibility to uphold the law through all this, he finds his involvement with Dom going above and beyond the call of the law. At first she hated Brian, and she wished to kill him for his nativity, but eventually she grew fond of the character. She wanted Brian to get with the team. Dominic was an interesting character, loyal to his friends, and loyal to his family, something that she found a quality in Kakarot himself, during the short time of being in his presence. Hela shouted at the screen, multiple times. I really had to cover her mouth, because I was afraid we would be kicked out. But I was glad she liked it enough to gain an emotional response towards what had happened. when the most shocking thing that happened was when Mia and Brian finally got together and started to kiss, which led Hela to a state of confusion. It sounded really interesting and looked pleasant. Is this what mortals did when they found their mate? She did not know if Asgard did the same, for she was a young woman before she was sealed. She was very young when her father taught her how to rule and conquer. This love was a waste of time to her father. Because of him, Asgard was in a state of war. She was eventually bred into it, and war became her life, eventually becoming her, not really knowing anything else until she met Kakarot. In such a short amount of time, Kakarot did more for her than any other person did, including her father. He gave her a chance, a second chance, when he could have killed her right then. Even when he knew what she had done, she had a lot of people trying to court her over the years that she was unsealed. She had always killed them, or ripped their balls out from their bodies. The moment she laid eyes on Kakarot, she could tell that he was a warrior, and that he was different than the rest. This only proved logical when she was bested with a simple kick. Even though she was injured from escaping the seal, she still had enough strength to kill an average Asgardian with ease, and upon knowing she was a Midgardian she laughed. She couldn't believe it. But then again, she could. He must be a special case. Hela looked at him. She had a series of flashbacks regarding her return to the present. In such a short amount of time, this mortal had managed to help me in a way that no one could have possibly could. Hela thought. She looked back at the screen and saw Brian and Mia making out continuously, after analyzing why they did what they did. Hela looked towards me and gave me a dark smirk. She made her decision. I noticed the dark smirk on her face, and not going to lie, it looked very creepy. But it honestly kind of turned me on. Unexpectedly, Hela latched out, much to my surprise, and grabbed my collar, before yanking me forward, smashing my lips with hers. My eyes widened in surprise at the sudden development. I stood there frozen for a short moment, too shocked to make an action, before. Eventually, I regained my composure. I kissed her back. Though it was sloppy at first, Hela eventually began to get a grasp on it. The two of us began to make out, ignoring the attention that turned to us again, and some cheers. Chapter 21. Hela's acceptance. We made out. I felt Hela's tongue enter my mouth, giving me a slight shiver. Once her tongue met mine, we began to fight for dominance. Much to her dismay, I dominated hers with ki, and my tongue began to slide up and down her tongue before using every single inch of her mouth. I could feel Hela shiver, as she gave a low moan. It took a while for us to break. Before we finally did, the both of us were panting. Hela turned her attention back to the screen. I stared at Hela opened mouth and frozen from the shock. No thoughts went through my mind at the time. That was my first kiss, in this lifetime and in my previous life, and to a death goddess no less. As reality sunk in. EXE has shut down. My mind went blank. Even if everyone who saw it whistled and cheered for us, some even jealous and whispering curses at us, I didn't hear a thing. To me, the world went silent, and all I could only do was stare at Hela in shock. Oblivious to my feelings, however, Hela watched the movie, but her expression shifted from a dark smirk to a happy smile. For once in a very, very long time, she felt happy. The movie went on, and I just stared at Hela the entire time. Movie, although loud as hell, it wasn't even registering in my brain. Once the movie was over, everyone started to leave. Some looked at my frozen statue state giggling, snickering or smirking. Others had looks of jealousy and envy on her face. Everyone left. Hela punched me in the face. Now is rebooting. I snapped out of my daze. Shall we return to our home? She asked, a smirk present on her face. Sure. I shook my head and shakily got up. I realized that my hands were shaking. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, calming myself down. Looking back, I offered my arm back to her, which I noticed instead of hesitating, she casually slipped her hand through it, and leaned into it, pressing her breasts on my arm. Her smirk grew at my even more flustered look. The two of us began to walk out of the theater. With her leaning against me, the two of us walked back to the car. Although I was calmer, I was still nervous, happy, and confused. Why did she do that? This was so unlike her. It took a while, but I had to ask eventually. Hela, I muttered, catching her attention. She tilted her head upwards to look at me, smirk still present on her face. What is it you wish of me, darling? Another shiver went down my spine as she said the last word. Why? Hela knew what I mean. She wasn't an idiot. A bit naive to Midgardian culture, yes, she admits that to herself. But she was by no means an idiot. She glanced back out the front mirror with a faraway look in her eyes. She just stared at it for a long while. Acceptance. Hela mumbled under her breath. What? I asked. I do not know. Hela admitted, my feelings are still conflicted. I am confused as if now. I stared at her. Kakarot. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. You are the only just a mortal, and yet, in such a short moment, you have managed to do to me what nobody else could ever do. Hela opened her eyes. You saw me as Hela, the Asgardian, and not Hela the Death Goddess, the Slayer of Worlds, the Conqueror of the 9 Realms. She paused for a moment, before she continued. In this short time, you managed to do to me what no one else has ever done before. She glanced to me and looked me into my eyes. You gave me a second chance to be someone other than a death goddess. Hela closed her eyes one more time. I know not of this feeling, Kakarot. I was conflicted for a while, but now. She opened her eyes and gazed into mine. I accepted it. Chapter 22. Reassurance. The travel home was different than going to the theater itself. As I look at Hela, I could tell that a burden was lifted from her shoulders. She looked more free, I should say. I accepted it. Hela's words flashed into my brain repeatedly. She accepted her feelings of attraction towards me? No longer did she let her pride as a goddess affect her love towards me. She began to welcome it instead of feel shame and anger. Instead of hate, she began to love it. She began to feel happy. I began to smile as I drove off. Hela, my God, what a woman she was. Not only was she incredibly strong and tough, but she's so beautiful and sexy both on the outside and on the inside. I am starting to know more about her. She is like an adorable kitten that just wants to be loved, even if she has rejected that feeling for a while in order to be what she was raised to be. That's what I began to see inside of her gorgeous appearance. I made it to the apartment, and the two of us went into the bed. Hela stared at it with a frown. Everything all right, Hela? I do not think the mattress is enough to fit the two of us. Hela responded. I blinked in surprise. What? She raised an eyebrow. You are my mate, are you not? I blinked again. What? She quirked her lips upwards, if I recall correctly. I remember that you said the date was supposed to decide if I want you to be my mate or not. What? Hela smirked. I decided. I think you are more worthy than anyone else to be my mate. I stared at her in shock. Did she? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I opened them up and slowly walked towards her. Hela's eyes never left my form, and the smirk was still present on her face when she gazed at me in the eyes, the mortal who had did so much more for her than anyone had ever done. As I closed the gap within hers, I stared at her within my new skill. Soul Gaze. A powerful magic spell that I have been working on for a very long time. I finally managed to get it right. But I was never able to test it on anyone. This of course would not affect anyone but me if it manages to backfire, but I tried it just to be safe. My eyes glowed with magic, and the smirk on Hela's lips left her face. As I looked deep into her soul, I accidentally made a mistake, and instead of just seeing if she would stab me in the back, I began to see just exactly who it was that made Hela Hela. I never used this on anyone because it takes a lot out of you, and I was really new to it, so I wanted to make sure that it would work. If I really wanted to become her mate, I wanted to be sure she wasn't playing me just so she could get her powers and abilities back and stab me in the back. As I looked, I wasn't disappointed. When I mean by everything, from her own birth to becoming the woman that she was today, everything from the smallest detail. Once everything was done, my eyes stopped glowing. I took a deep breath, trying to get myself in check. At least I learned from where I made my mistake, so it won't happen again. But what I've learned. Odin. He really was a shitty parent. And Hela. Oh my fucking god. Hela. What did you just do? Hela growled. She knew she couldn't take him on with her own powers sealed, but she didn't want to jump into conclusions just yet. She needed to ask. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't want her to run away in fear of rejection, so instead of answering, I leaned forward and captured my lips with hers. Hela's eyes widened in surprise at the unexpected action, before slowly she eventually gave in. We began to make out once more. Chapter 23. NSFW, Power Unsealed. MNNN. It's time. My hands twitched, causing the seal of magic to go off inside of her. Hela suddenly felt a rush, a huge rush of familiar power growing rapidly within her. her power, returning back to her. Hela moaned loudly before she opened her eyes. The glow of power was enough to startle me before she raised her hand and grabbed me by my throat, lifting me up with barely any effort at all, before slamming me onto the mattress. Her hand was still on my throat. Raising her other hand, a blade formed into her hand, and she sliced through my clothes, with perfect precision. She looked down at my meat stick and licked her lips. She dispelled her blade and reached out to touch the tip. At a twitch she smirked and started to grab hold of it before she started to stroke really fast. Hela smirked as I groaned and shifted as multiple spikes of pleasure shot through my spine at lightning-fast speeds. Hela's lips twisted into a dark smirk. "How does that feel, cockroach?" I shivered in response. After a couple of moments, my dick erupted, and cum exploded shooting out of it like water from a water hose. Hela licked the cum from her lips, very slowly before she wiped the cum from her face and began to lick the cum off of her fingers in a sensual manner. I smirked, sexy, my eyes flashed golden, before my hand grabs her wrists, as her other hand was still on my throat, and pulls her off. Much to her surprise, my hair spikes up, and I let out a roar. My roar sends her flying back into the wall, as I release my key. I lunged across the room and pinned her to the wall. Hela looked in shock, because as quickly as she gained dominance, she began to lose it. As she stared into my eyes, Hela noticed that my eyes, which were once onyx black, was now yellow. She raised her hand and she formed another blade and attack, only for me to block it and smack her hand away with such force that her blade dropped from her hand. My hand reached down to her pussy and I started to rub so fast that my hands became a blur. Her pussy felt good in my hands. Her eyes became half-lidded as she began to moan really loudly. "Well, my dear," I smirked coldly. "Who's the deity now?" Hela couldn't answer properly. Having never experienced such pleasure before in her entire thousands-of-year life, she could only moan like a harlot as I continued to rub her. My smirk grew. Chapter 24. NSFW, Dance with the Death Goddess. "Don't tell me this is all you got," I smirked. I thought the goddess of death would pick up a better fight before being dominated like a common whore. This seems to ignite a fire in her eyes. Her lips twisted into a snarl, ignoring the feelings of great pleasure. She gave out more power to her legs before she kneed me in the balls, causing me to double over before she kicked me away from her. She panted slightly as she stood. She glared at me. Before she lunged at me, I smiled and lunged back at her. The two of us began to exchange blows, punches and kicks which seemed to cause the walls in the room to crack and the building to shake. I smirked at her as my blood was pumping. Blocking a kick, I grabbed her by the ankle and proceeded to spin her, controlling my strength so the entire building won't crumble, before sending her flying towards the mattress. The second her back impacted the bed tore in half. Hela once again felt pain, but instead of pride she felt more pride. This mortal, the one whom she had feelings towards, was proving himself to be more worthy than any other male she had encountered before. She fired a blade at me. I encased my finger with Ki and deflected the blade, causing her eyes to widen before she fired another, which was met with the same result. Hela lunged at me and punched me in the gut with even greater force, but the force making me surprised at the unexpected growth of strength, sending me flying into the air, but I managed to control myself into a stop as I landed gently onto the wall before rushing back at Hela. I punched her in the gut, causing her eyes to widen. She let out a cough before I punched her again with my other fist. I slammed her to the ground and ripped off her own clothing. Hela growled at me and attempted to attack me, but I smirked, grabbing her hands and pinning them behind her head. My other hand reached out and I ended up groping her breast. I marveled at how soft it felt. Hela moaned softly as my hand continued to grope her breasts. She tried to break free from my grip, but the only thing that she could do was shift and turn. I pinched her nipples, which sent another bolt of pleasure down her spine. I flipped her over and started to smack at her ass, enjoying seeing it jiggle, and enjoying hearing Hela scream out in pleasure. My hands still holding hers in place. I put my hand down her pussy and started to rub it really fast once again. This lasted a couple of moments, before I began to see her body become numb and limp, as her panting grew heavier. "I think it's time, Hela," I smirked, as I positioned my dick to point at her entrance. "Are you ready?" "Why, yes," she managed. "Breed me, bear me your child." I smirked, before I thrusted forward. Screams and moans were echoed throughout the night. Chapter 25. Aftermath. My eyes slowly fluttered open. My eyes spotted a nude Hela snuggled into my chest, sleeping peacefully. My eyes shot open as I remembered the events that happened last night. I closed my eyes and I chuckled. Sex was not what it was proclaimed to be. I thought it was so much better. I looked over at Hela's peaceful form and smiled. I could stare at it for hours. I looked around, noticing all the damage done to my room, but the walls seemed to be completely fine. Last night was wild as hell. I muttered. Indeed it was, a familiar voice muttered. I gazed down only for my eyes to meet Hela's. I smirked. Hey babe, how are you feeling? She stretched, showing her perfect body to the world. Ignoring the cracks of her own bones, she sighed. Better than I had ever been, she said. I wish to stay like this forever. I smiled at her, but before I could say anything, I heard a click. Both of our necks snapped to the source to spot Jason grinning like a madman, camera in hand. Morning, lovebirds. I glared at him. Jason? OH. Breed me harder, cockroach. He fake moaned, in a poor imitation of Hela. OH, more, give me more. Jason, shut up. I growled, heat rushing to my cheeks. What? Jason mocked. Didn't you say you wouldn't be banging the goddess of death a couple of hours after you just met? And yet here you are, both of you on the bed like you had the best fuck of your lives. Oh, breed me, cockroach. Make me your woman. Jason continued to moan, before his eyes suddenly shot open. Jason screamed in fright and quickly sidestepped, just as a blade impacted the wall where his head once stood. Hela stood up, glaring at Jason, completely red in the face. Jason muttered. I thought her powers were sealed. She passed the test. I said, her powers were unsealed. Jason raised an eyebrow, before he looked at Hela, who was glaring deadly at him with a scowl on her face. He shivered. Well, that's good to know. But I will be out in the living room, he muttered. He glanced at me and nodded. Oh, and by the way, the project we have been waiting for is ready. I didn't want to publish it until you were with me. My eyes widened in surprise. Great. I'll be with you in the moment. He looked at Hela nervously and slowly left the room. Once he was gone, Hela huffed. Your friend is irritating. He'll grow on you. I smiled. He's pretty chill once you get to know him. I doubt that, Hela said, causing me to chuckle. Come on. Let's get ready. Chapter 26. New project. Hela watched me as I trained. Push-ups, sit-ups. As many push-ups as I can before I get tired. Hela was impressed, as she gazed at me. But once I was done, tiring myself out, I nodded to Hela and the two of us took a shower, this time together. I can do it myself. Hela muttered, embarrassed slightly. I smirked. I know. I grabbed the rag and the bar of soap, and did it myself. I began to scrub all over her body. Her body was amazingly perfect in every way, and each part was perfect when I touched her, from her feet to the top of her hair. Hela looked down, her eyes shadowed from embarrassment as she felt me cleanse her. She gave out slight moans as I touched her sensitive areas, which only furthered her embarrassment. She then spotted another washcloth. She suddenly smirked. Grabbing onto the washcloth, shuddering as I got under her arms, she turned and grabbed the bar of soap, rubbed it in the cloth real fast, before she put the bar of soap down and began to scrub me, which caught me by surprise. How does it feel, cockroach? Hela laughs. To be utterly humiliated like this? I actually feel fine, I said, smirking, causing her to look at me in surprise. Yeah, having such a sexy goddess like yourself touching me all over like I'm some type of precious treasure, makes me flattered. Hela blushed. Well, you should. It's unthinkable for a goddess such as myself to do this to a mortal. You should feel honored. I was honored when I gave you your first time. I said with a smile, you truly are a wonderful woman. I am lucky to have you around. Hela's blush turned several shades darker. She remained silent, and started to scrub faster. I laughed. Once we were finished, we got ready. Hela was wearing her own suit from which I had seen in the MCU, while I was wearing the iconic orange turtle hermit martial arts gi. The two of us walked towards the living room, where Jason and Kimberly sat cuddled together near the computer. When Kimberly spotted us, she raised an eyebrow, before she smiled softly. Congratulations. I nodded, thank you. You do realize that you were very loud though, right? Kimberly asked, causing me to scratch the back of my head, smiling sheepishly. Yeah, I got caught up in the moment. Hopefully I didn't disturb you guys. We had to put up silencing spells on the room, so our neighbors don't complain to us. Kimberly deadpanned. Not to mention the fact that your fucking almost destroyed the entire apartment. We managed to keep as much as what you did contained in that room, but still. Kimberly smirked at Hela. How does it feel to be fucked by a mortal? Hela scowled and remained silent. A huge blush was on her cheeks though. I'll take that as an amazing. Kimberly giggled. I'd be lying if I was saying I wasn't jealous of you. Oi, don't you have me? Jason asked. Kimberly smiled. I love you, Jason, you're a great man, but I'm just telling the truth. I think Andrew is much better looking than you. Jason scowled for a moment. The scowl quickly faded when his lips were suddenly stolen in a flame of passion. The two of them made out for a good moment, before they broke. I will never leave you for him, Jason. Besides, he already rejected me. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow. What's wrong with Kimberly? Nothing is wrong with Kimberly. I just wasn't attracted to her. I saw her as a friend, maybe even a little sister. I glanced at Jason and he nodded. So about the project? His eyes lit up. All right. Well, you know we have been working on it a couple of months ago. I think it's ready to be released. What is this project? Hela asked, tilting her head in curiosity. Just an idea that I made into reality. I explained. I call it Project YouTube. Chapter 27. Separate. So, last chance. Are you sure you want this to go online? Jason asked. Are you? I shot back. Me personally, don't care. Jason replied with a shrug. I raised my eyebrow. You seemed so eager before? Nah, I had this dream. I know it's going to fail. All of my other projects did. Jason replied. I laughed. Hey, what's with the laugh? Jason asked. I'm just being straight. Being straight? I asked. I remember you saying you wished to become a millionaire and get out of this apartment and live out a fantasy? Jason rolled his eyes. Whatever, I get your point, but don't say I didn't warn you. With a click, I smiled. Yo. So, first video. My name is Andrew, this is my girlfriend Hela, followed by my friend, Jason, and his girl Kimberly, and we are standing here. I just want to properly say, welcome to YouTube. The site went online. I closed the laptop, as I didn't care about it, anymore. The deed had been done. Hela and I spent the rest of the day training together. Of course it was weird how much stronger I was and how I was able to easily keep up with her, but his strength was one of the reasons why I was considered worthy in her eyes, and was proof that she wasn't wrong with me. I still do not see how is it possible that you continue to best me, even if you are stronger than the other Midgardians. Was that a pout? So fucking adorable. Hela, I may be raised as a Midgardian, but I can assure you I am anything but. I smirked. I used my tail to wrap around her ankle much to her surprise before she was sent flailing in the air. Eventually I slammed her down onto the ground with controlled strength. She looked at the tail with wide eyes as I let my illusion slip. So, what are you then, she asked, if you are not a Midgardian? I am a part of the most great warrior race known as the Saiyans. I said with a grin, causing Hela to look at him confused. Saiyans, you say? I nodded. Is there a problem? Hela shook her head. Yes, there is Kakarot. If Saiyans were such a fearsome race, how come I had not heard of them during my conquest? I blinked. What? I have never heard of the Saiyan race. Hela replied. But if you are not human, then that most certainly explain your strength. I nodded. So that must mean that the Dragon Ball universe is a completely different timeline compared to the Marvel universe, so by some act of a higher omnipresent deity, maybe AR.OB. He decided it would be for great entertainment of him if he reincarnated me as Goku and sent me to a timeline that resembled Marvel. Or some serious being did so with a purpose. If so, I have to find out what that purpose is, and why am I here? I also will need to get strong enough, so I can give him revenge for taking me away from my family. Also, I don't want to be killed off if the guy decides he's bored and sends in DBZ antagonists into this universe just for fun. If it is for a purpose, however, that has no ill intent, I will play it by my own rules, not be under someone's thumb. Then when all said is done, figure out a way to take me back. It doesn't matter if they don't recognize me as their son. I have a couple secrets of them that only I know, and they will recognize me from that. Kakarot. Hela's voice cut me through my thoughts. I snapped out of my daze. I'm fine, Hela, I dash. Chapter 28. Odin. Odin felt something leave him, his energy felt drained, but he realized what this was. He wanted to deny it, he wanted to, but it was impossible for him not to. It was her, his firstborn. Stepping out of his throne, Odin quickly departed from the room. He knew now how quickly it would be. But he quickly paused himself. He wondered if he could tell him. Hela was a closely guarded secret after all. He shook his head and continued to depart. My king. Heimdall. Odin greeted. You know why I am here? Hela. Heimdall said, his eyes never once leaving the cosmos, more specifically Midgard, at a certain point where the goddess of death resided. The goddess of death. Odin felt his heart lurch. You know of her? I do. Heimdall nodded his head. I see. Odin frowned. He followed Heimdall's gaze, and he too stared at the cosmos. You were not haste to alert me, why? Heimdall continued to stare into the cosmos before he eventually responded to the All-Father's words. There was no reason to be alarmed. Heimdall replied. Odin frowned. The goddess of death, whom you've mentioned, is indeed out there. Heimdall's lips quirked upwards into a small smile, confronted by a mortal, and is currently changing. Odin's eyes narrowed. Explain. The mortal, who is called Kakarot, but goes by the name Andrew, is the strongest warrior Midgard has to offer. Heimdall paused for a moment. He found Hela the moment after she escaped your seal and began to change her heart. There paused before he continued. Odin's eyes locked onto Heimdall's. You mean to tell me? It's true, my king. Heimdall smiled softly. The goddess of death is beginning to fall for a mortal. There was a long moment of pause as Odin's expression changed to that of disbelief. Hela, with a mortal. I am possible, Odin mumbled to himself. Heimdall slowly nodded his head. It is indeed possible, my king. I saw it my own eyes. Right after he bested her with a simple kick and restrained her magic. Silence. Absolute silence. My king. Is everything all right? Heimdall asked, concerned, as Odin stood frozen. How is it possible? It took everything I had to seal her, and this mortal. This Midgardian was able to do so with a simple kick. Odin asked in disbelief. Heimdall was startled, as he never seen his king act like this before, but nodded his head nonetheless. If it's all the same to you, my king, Hela did not break free from your seal unscathed. Heimdall said. She had grave injuries that were almost fatal. Odin frowned. And she was still alive? Odin asked. The mortal healed her. Heimdall stated simply. I see. Odin frowned, his conflicted thoughts once again rising at how a simple mortal could accomplish such feats. We must prepare then. No doubt they are planning on coming here out of revenge and taking the throne of Asgard for himself. Heimdall shook his head. That actually might not be true. Heimdall said with a small smile, although it might hardly believe, the mortal Kakarot, the Midgardian's call Andrew, has convinced Hela to take her eyes off Asgard, off the throne, and she began to focus on him and only him. Odin didn't know what to feel at that. He was still angry at a mortal for daring to seduce his daughter, but he was relieved that Hela did not seek revenge. He was upset, and very disappointed that Hela was trying not to care for Asgard at all. The whole reason why he sealed her was because he regretted his actions during his time of conquest, and Hela did not seem to regret hers. She was growing out of his own control in strength, and in mind. To think that this lowly mortal was able to do what he could not. He didn't know what to feel. My king. That is all, Heimdall. Odin said, dismissed himself. He went back to his throne and sat back down on his chair, and closed his eyes. I must meditate on this. Chapter 29. 8 years later. Hela sat down in the living room, a cup of tea in her hand. She seemed to be reading something. In the middle was a title labeled, Tony Stark kidnapped by Russian terrorist, darling. She called out. Another being had walked by. This was Kakarot. The people of Earth call him Andrew, or in Hela's case, Kakarot. He was wearing clothing that was very similar to Goku's outfit. He even had his own powerful power pole that he created himself via magic materialization, and customed it with a staff. On his forehead he wore a bandana that was similar to the one his father, Bardock, wore. This was Kakarot, or me. To be precise. She looked me up and down before gazing at the newspaper. The Stark's heir is kidnapped, she said. Judging by your state of dress, you already knew that, didn't you? I nodded. Do you plan on interfering? She asked. I smiled, and pecked her lips. Yes, I do, my love. Tony Stark is an important person. Hela smiled. Have your fun then, as usual. I'll be here, calmly sipping tea. You do that. I smiled knowingly, although knowing you, I doubt that's all you do. Like last time. Flashback. Ah ha 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 ha. Bang bang bang. Retreat. 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 R_ACH. A midnight-colored blade slashed through the unknown person's heart. As a shadow revealed itself to be Hela with a cold smirk. "Where are you, Kingpin?" she cooed. "Don't think you can just do that and get away with it." F. Ash back end. "In my defense, he got what was coming to him," Hela said with a shrug. "He shouldn't have tried to kidnap me just because he tried and failed to kill you after you humiliated him at those midnight festivities what was it you called, a casino?" I rolled my eyes. "Yes, I got a call from Master Eyepatch because of that." Flashback. "Hello? This is Andrew speaking? Motherfucker. It's been a while since we met, Master Eyepatch. This is how you greet me?" I asked with a mock voice. "Cut the bullshit, Parker." I could hear the snarl in his voice. "What the hell happened last night?" "Oh, nothing you need to worry about, Master Eyepatch," I smiled. "Someone tried to kidnap my girl and paid the price for it." "You dash. I got to go by." I hung up. Flashback end. Hela snorted. "Foolish mortal. He dares think he can order you around like some common slave." I chuckled. I humored it. "So about 8 years have passed, and not much has really changed over the years. I graduated from college in software engineering, and became a multi-billionaire, co-CEO of YouTube with countless ads and commercials. Jason and Kimberly moved out to get a new house. It was big and fancy, but it didn't matter to me. Hela and I bonded more and more through time, and she fell for me. I think some of me rubbed off on her. I began to fall for her as well, and actually proposed to her. We got married in a private. No fuck no. Hela would not allow that. It was grand. And public for all to see. Oh, Hela does still care for Asgard, but she doesn't, want revenge. She doesn't care about Odin in particular anymore, though she still wants to beat the shit out of him for what he did to her. Something I respect. Oh, and since it was 8 years, I was able to get so much stronger than I was 8 years ago, with Hela, due to all the Zenkais I have gotten through training with her along with my knowledge in magic. Tell me if this is unrealistic. I had managed to keep constantly training. Unlikely the mortals here was different, but all my masters had such different styles and techniques, and all were very powerful in their own right. I had managed to take their techniques as my own and grow in strength. With my own power I managed to grow. I glanced at the clock on my watch and smiled. "Wish me luck." She leaned up and pecked me on the lips. "You don't need it." "I know." I smiled as a portal opened up before I stepped through. The portal closed. Chapter 30. Tony and Ensign. "Don't waste your life, Stark." A voice said. This belonged to a voice. "Don't waste it." "You do not have to waste anything," a voice suddenly interrupted, startling the both of them. The guy I assumed Tony was obviously the only one capable to react as he walked towards me as fast as he could with the armor and threw a punch. It did absolutely nothing. "What are you?" Tony asked, his voice shaking in fear. "I am a friend," I responded, placing my hand on the arm of Ensign. "Ensign, you were very brave of what you just did. But your family would not want you to kick the bucket without living a life of your own just yet." A glow started to appear in my hands, before it completely enveloped Ensign, bathing him in an orange glow, healing all of his wounds. Ensign looked at himself shocked, before he gazed at me. "Are you an angel?" I chuckled. "Unfortunately no. And the angels you know have wings, my angels don't." I was of course referring to the god of destruction attendants like Whis and Vados, but he does not need to know that. "I see, well then, mister." He trailed off, not knowing my name. I smiled. "You may call me Cockroach," I said with a smile. "That is by far the most peculiar name I have ever heard of." The hulking giant proclaimed. His face mask opened, revealing the face of the famous Tony Stark. He figured since he healed Ensign, then this stranger must be a friend. "Tony Stark," I said with a nod. "It's nice to meet you." "Same to you," Tony Stark smirked. "So, with that light show, was that some sort of new tech or something I never heard about?" "That's actually magic," I explained. Tony rolled his eyes. "Whatever, don't tell me then, I'll figure it out on my own." "Believe what you will then." I shrugged, not caring in the slightest. "Although I can't take you home just yet. The public had just been told that you have just been kidnapped. Then you suddenly appear completely covered in armor and fine? They won't take too kindly to that." "Smart thinking," Tony said with a slow nod. "All right, son Kaka, whatever." I shot him a blank look before I sighed. "You know what, just call me Andrew." "As in the co-CEO of YouTube?" Tony asked. He looked me over, and he swore. "Honestly, I thought you were just a cosplayer, but everything is beginning to make sense now." I snorted, and with a twitch of my fingers, I dropped them both through portals before I myself stepped through myself. So Fury had his guesses and he assumed that you'd rescue him, a voice said. It looks like he was right. I nodded. Yeah. I said, I guess he was. I smiled in greeting. It's nice to see you again. My smile turns jokingly, Mistress Natasha. Chapter 31. Natasha-sensei. Tony's and Ianson stared at what was before them. A hot red-headed woman in a sexy all-black skin-tight suit. I told you 1,000 times not to call me that, Natasha said flatly. Whatever. I grinned. You're just angry that I decided to marry Hela instead of you. You may be stronger than me now, but that won't stop me from smashing you to the ground. She glared at me before her lips quirked upwards into a smirk. You know, like old times. You know, you cheated multiple times during those spars. I deadpanned. You know, like the kick to dick so many times I began to grow immune to it. Among other stuff I'd rather not talk about right now, but you know damn well what those things are. Tony and Ianson both cringed, and resisted the urge to cover their own private areas. Oh, quit being such a baby. Natasha rolled her eyes. I couldn't do much with brute strength because you were so much stronger than me. Hell, I didn't even know how to teach. True, she did her best to teach me what she knew. At first it was a rocky start, but eventually she began grow feelings of an elder sibling towards me. I guess you can say Natasha was my older sister by anything but blood. You made me stronger though, I said with a grin. You were a great teacher, even if you played dirty. Natasha smiled at me. I smiled back, before glancing at Tony and Ianson. Tony, Ianson, this is my teacher, Natasha. Are you single? Tony asked bluntly. Natasha smiled. It was one of those smiles I know all too well. I almost pity Tony now. Tony, she will be taking you and Ianson to where you will be staying for the time being. They will help you clear this mess up. Ianson looks at me with a frown. Who's they? SHIELD. Natasha answered. Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. Basically a super-secret government agency. I told them, you can trust them to handle your situation. That sounds like a mouthful. Ianson muttered. We get that a lot. Natasha smiled, and turned to me. It was nice to see you again, Andrew. As was you, I nodded with a smile. You coming over for dinner? The kids would love to have you. I can't unfortunately, she smiled sadly. I have things to take care of. Somewhere else. I kind of knew what she was talking about. I simply nodded her head. I understand. Hey, wait, Dash. Behave. I told Tony, before a portal opened up and I stepped through it. Hela walked trough the desert field with a slow stride. Each stride was met with a sway, as she walked, until she reached her destination. A couple of meters in front of her was a huge crater. In the center of that crater stood the power she had been sensing, Asgardian magic. The power is only that a royal should have. She looked down, and what she saw had proven her correct. There stood at the center of a crater was a hammer. But not just any hammer. This was a hammer that once belonged to the god of thunder Thor. She smirked. Father, you fool. Chapter 32. Thor. It was a huge storm that just formed through the air. Meanwhile, 4 kids were going through the storm without the slightest care of death. All of them were annoyed, but one so in particular was more annoyed than the rest of them. Ugh, I am so annoyed. Jine, calm down. No, Tina, I will not. The now named Jine screamed. Everything was clear just a few seconds ago. This doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's our Uncle Thor? Another voice asked. Father said if anything unusual like this happens, it's most likely him that caused this. Either him or Zeus Gohan. Zelera said flatly. Ack, well, curse both of them, I did not sign up for this. Jine growled. Before her eyes spotted something spiraling in the air. Look out! She pushed the 3 out of the way as something impacted her right in the head, knocking her out cold. Jine! 3 rushed in to help her. Gohan raised his hands and 2 magic circles appeared, and started swarming her up and down as if Ithi were analyzing her. The blonde dude is unconscious as well. She's okay. Gohan sighed. Just got knocked unconscious for a while. What about that dude? Zelera pointed to the body of the other unconscious body. Gohan did the same thing he did to his sister to her. You know, I think that might be Uncle Thor. Gorgeous blonde hair. Drop dead sexy. That's Thor all right. Tina said, staring at him for a rather long period of time. Gohan shot her a deadpan look. Really, Tina? Just Saiyan. Tina shrugged. I personally believe father is more sexy than him. Zellera responded flatly. You're right, Tina agreed, but still can't help but point it out. True. I can't believe what I am hearing right now. Gohan said blankly. He picked up Thor and threw him over his shoulders while he gently picked up Jine and carried her bridal style. I'm going home. He raised his hand and did a circular motion. A portal opened up. He stepped through. Tina and Zellera exchanged looks. Before they both smiled and shrugged before following him through, the portal closed. Hela walked through the crater, ignoring everyone there. She looked at the hammer, and she grinned. Hello, old friend. She said. She reached out to touch. And the moment she grabbed the hammer, a bolt of lightning struck her. And the sound of her father's voice echoed through her mind. If he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. A bolt of lightning struck, and a shock wave blew everyone back. For a few moments the bolt of lightning remained. Before long, she saw the memories. She saw all of the memories that her foolish little brother had been through. What her father had done according to him all of the years. She was beginning to grow in rage, and now wanted to beat his ass twice as hard as before. Thor, he's lucky she doesn't want the throne anymore, nor does she want his pathetic power. Mjolnir has been corrupted by him after all, so she doesn't feel like it's hers, thanks to her father for that. But it still feels good to hold the hammer once again, and it was a bit of surprise to be considered worthy by her father's standards. She certainly feels more worthy than her foolish little brother. Once the light died down, stood Hela, clothed in a blue armor crimson cape and had a Viking helmet on her head. She looked up, eyes glowing blue with electricity before slowly fading. She clenched her hammer tighter, enjoying the feeling of it. Before she smiled, she wondered how her husband would think of this. Ignoring the jaws dropping, she saw the trucks zooming in, with people to get a good look at her. She ignored them, spun the hammer with lightning-fast speeds before she took off to the skies, a sonic boom echoing in her wake. Chapter 33. Son of Odin. My eyes widened once I felt the key from my wife shift. It wasn't a huge change, but it was like another element had passed through it. It was enough to get my attention. My eyes also narrowed when an orange portal opens up. I knew this was my children's energy signature, but I also recognized that key is very similar to my wife and kids. And it has a strong resemblance to the new key that Hela has currently. My son, Gohan, 7.5 years old, he seems to be carrying Jine, my daughter who is 5 years old, bridal carry, with an unconscious though. I blinked. Ah. Everything is starting to make sense now, I thought, staring at Thor with a thoughtful look on my face. Hey Dad. Tina, she was the twin sister to Gohan, followed by Zellera who was 6 years old. I know that is somewhat of a rare occurrence with humans on Earth. I have no idea how that happened either. There was just a period of time where the both of us were horny as hell and had done nothing but fuck like rabbits. Good times. Good times. Hello Tina, Gohan, Zellera. I said, smiling calmly. How was school? The usual. Zellera said flatly. Up until a random storm came out of nowhere. Tina added, we saw Uncle Thor fall from the sky, knocking Jine out cold. My eyes locked onto my youngest daughter, expression shifting to concern as I remembered in the Dragon Ball anime. That is exactly how Goku lost his memories. She's fine, Dad. Gohan said. I already checked on her. I nodded to him. I made sure all of my children were prepared for the real world. The unknown could be manipulated and used as a weapon against us to tear us apart. Especially when you're married to a goddess of death, so in order to be sure, I told them everything. I told them about Hela's past. I told them about Asgard. I told them about the Saiyans. I told them about the history of the Saiyans. They were shocked, but instead of growing fear, they accepted it, and we moved on from there. I taught them how to control the Azaru. I taught them how to do magic and ki. The first thing that I did was teach them how to control the monkey form, then following after was magic and ki training. Suddenly a crackle of thunder was heard. The door was slammed open, causing all of us to turn to the source. It was Hela, in blue Asgardian armor with a crimson cape and a silver Viking helmet. Not going to lie, I stared. What do you think of my new look, dear? Hot. Hela's smirk grew and was about to respond when, ugh! A voice moaned as all eyes turned to her. Jine stared as her eyelids slowly fluttered open. What hit me? Uncle Thor. Zellera responded flatly. Jine looked at her in confusion, but Zelera pointed to Thor, who was still laying on the ground unconscious. Hela looked to Thor with an unreadable expression. Jine took a deep breath. So, are we going to wake him up? Gohan asked. I suggest we tie him up. Tina muttered. Zelera nodded silently in agreement with her eldest sister. My eyebrows twitched. Screw that. Jine growled. She glared at the unconscious body. Oi, Goldilocks. She kicked him really hard in the ribs. Wake up. As a normal human girl her age, this wouldn't hurt much, but Jine was half Saiyan, half Asgardian, so, basically it hurt like hell. Thor flipped into the air before he landed onto his back. He grunted as his eyes snapped open. He jumped up onto his feet and glared daggers at the girl. You dare strike the son of Odin, he growled. I don't care who you are. Hela stepped in. Glaring at Thor, you do not talk to my daughter like that. Thor glared at Hela, but once his eyes locked on Hela he paused. His eyes went up Hela's form from head to toe, taking in everything at once, before his gaze landed onto the hammer. His eyes widened, and a sense of dread washed over him as he stared at the hammer that had chosen a new wielder. Impossible. Hela knew her brother's feelings, and loved every single second of his misery during his realization. Foolish little brother. She said, her smirk turning cruel. You have no idea what's possible. Chapter 34. Black Lightning. Yes, everything that you is indeed true. Hela smirks at him. It still sickens me that after all this time father tries his best to fix his mistakes he still makes them. Only this time, it's an idiot. Thor growled. I do not care if you are considered worthy or not. Do not speak such lies in my presence. Oh? You do not believe that you are my little brother? Hela's smirk if possible turns into a grin. That our dear father has been holding the truth out from you? She smacked him against the head with the hammer, sending him to the floor, causing cracks appear. Has Mom ever been this scary before? Jine whispered yes. Zelera responded flatly. Oh, Jine looked on. I think I love her even more now. Jine, you aren't saying that because Uncle Thor knocked you out cold and caused the storm, right? Gohan asked with a raised eyebrow. Shut up, Gohan. I have every right to feel what I feel. Jine shot back. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't. Technically it wasn't Uncle Thor's fault, Zelera responded flatly. If you want to blame someone, blame Grandpa. I curse him too. Jine muttered, causing Tina's eyes to widen in surprise, before she smirked. You've got balls of steel, little sister, she said with Zelera nodding in agreement, respect in her eyes. Gohan shook his head. For once in your miserable life think. Hela growled, look at my hammer. Yes, my hammer. Do you think it would have chose me had I been lying to you for something like this? She smacked him once again with his own hammer. He grunted in pain, as the floor cracked once again. Let me tell you another truth father lied to you about. Hela growled. This was mine long before the idea of you was ever formed into existence. But father took it from me. He took everything from me. Simply because I was too much for him to handle. She smacked him again. None of these smacks were enough to cause him death, but he still felt huge amount of pain, and blood trickling down his face. Peace, prosperity. Don't make me laugh. Hela glared at Thor like he was an ant, waiting to be crushed beneath her feet. I was bred for conquest. Under father's watchful gaze, we conquered together. Everything I had ever learned, everything I had ever been taught, it was taught for conquest. She slammed him to the ground, leaving him motionless. Love and peace? Don't make me laugh. Hela snarled. I was sealed, because my ambition was greater than his. What was his punishment? Oh, I regret my actions. I will change now, and I hope my daughter will change so suddenly too. She was so pissed off. She never noticed the sudden change of energy. The blue lightning that was sparking grew in power, and the color changed to black. I looked on with slight surprise. Black lightning. Gohan muttered. So, our mother is now the goddess of black lightning? Tina asked. That sounds really cool. Agreed. Zelera nodded her head. It's freaking awesome. Jine jumped in excitement. It looks so cool. Meanwhile with Hela and Thor. Hela had her boot and smashed it against Thor, causing the cracks to grow larger. He never even gave me a chance before he sealed me away. Unlike Kakarot. I owe him everything for what he has done. For what he has done had caused me to see the light of day. He showed me how to love, how to feel, and how to be happy. something I had not felt since the day my mother passed on. Hela was panting now. I put my hand on her shoulder, ignoring the black lightning, and squeezed for comfort. She took deep breaths to calm herself down. She glared at Thor before she walked out. I clicked my fingers, and an orange glow bathed the floor, fixing the floor and healing Thor on the spot. Thor was healed. I helped him up. I looked him in the eyes. I saw that there was no life in them. Like all the life, all the purpose, has been crushed from beneath them. I apologize on behalf of my wife, I said. She got a little bit carried away. No need to apologize, mortal, Thor mumbled, for she was right. I am a fool. Chapter 35. Who are you? No need to apologize, mortal, Thor mumbled, for she was right. I am a fool. All that I had known, I had it all wrong. Thor sighed as he recalled what his sister had said to him. Finding out he had an older sister was a shocking revelation, and he'd thought she was lying to him at first. However, she was right. She was worthy of his hammer. If you told such a lie as that, for deceptions and manipulations, you would not be considered worthy. Silence followed. For a long moment. Ugh, this is so depressing. Jine groaned. Look, Goldilocks, you messed up big time. Big whoop. Get over it, and move on. It's not the end of the world. Gianni, his entire life has been a lie, Zellara replied flatly. I'm pretty sure it's not so easy to move on as you say. Of course it is. Jine crossed her arms. If Mom could do it, so can he. Now he is just being a baby. Thor frowned. Well, that was a rather harsh way to put it, I smiled, almost pityingly to him before I took a seat myself, in a meditative position. She's right. Also, not having all the answers is not necessarily a bad thing. Usually when you don't have all the right answers, you start asking the right questions. That's actually true. Gohan agreed. I am confused. Thor sighed. Everything I had ever known had been a lie, and for the first time in my life, I know not of what to do. At least you admitted it. I closed my eyes. That's the first step to finding your place in this universe. I opened my eyes. The rest is up for you to decide. The past doesn't matter. Who lied to you doesn't matter. It's how you respond to it that matters. Who are you, Thor? Are you an image of the past? Forged from the flames your father created? I stared where Hela was with a smile. Take this from me personally. The past doesn't have to be who you are. Rather, it's who you choose to be now that defines you. I see. Thor mumbled. I smiled at him. Good. Now come on, I'll cook dinner. Yes. Finally. Jine cheered. I'm starving. No, you three are going to train with me first, I said with a grin. Don't think just because your Uncle Thor is here that means you can skip it. Of course not. Jine smiled excitedly. So, will you finally be able to teach me elemental magic? No. I refuted, causing her to pout. Don't give me that look. You're not ready for that yet. Maybe in a couple of months. Fine. Training? Thor asked curiously. I nodded. Is it acceptable if I join then? I could teach my nephew and niece. He would have to get used to having an elder sister with a mate and offspring. Some things or two. No. I said, you will stay here with Hela. You two are more alike than you realize, but she is much less of an idiot. Thor visibly flinched, before he swallowed, and looked down. I understand. Good. Chapter 36. Cool down extended. Asterisk bang. The whole house shook from the force as we all felt Hela's power rise. Neither of us were concerned. The kids, well, they trained with Hela. If you do not know, Hela is brutal when it comes to training. Luckily all of my kids love training, but they prefer my training over Hela's. Mine is less savage-like. Though I had more intense training, Hela was able to join me in training. She would kick my ass. When I used my Ikari form, however, I kicked her ass. Every time she kicked my ass I grew in strength. It was much more. In strength just from being around her. I grew in strength so much I began to dominate her without using my Ikari form. But not for long, because Hela too didn't take being left in the dust too well, and began to train even harder than she had ever done so before. Her potential was great. Much like a Marvel version of Frisia. It makes sense if you really think about it. Odin at his prime had thousands of years of training, plus experience. Hela was only around 30 years old when she was sealed. Odin, it took everything he had to seal her away with his very own life force. Asterisk boom. Thor was startled by these explosions. So much so he immediately got into a stance. It wasn't a great stance. I could see so many flaws just from looking at it. What is that? That's our mom. Zellara replied flatly. She does that when she's pissed. Usually she goes to the mirror world, but she must be really pissed off. Thor tilted his head in confusion. I'm afraid I never heard of this mirror world. It's another dimension, Tina said, much to Thor's surprise. I was unaware Midgard was aware of these knowledge. They don't. I sighed. Only a very selected few know about it. Bang. This time everyone's eyes widened, as the whole house began to crumble from the shake of power. I sighed before my hands twitched. A orange glow bathed the entire house before it faded. I really think Mom needs to calm down, Gohan said nervously. Not it. For me, Bjine said immediately. I love my mom, but I do not want to get caught in that. I already got knocked out by Goldilocks over there. Thor bowed his head in shame. I shook my head and sighed before I got up. I'll go calm her down. Meanwhile, with Hela. Rake! Hela roared with her eyes glowing black. She seemed to be surrounded by a black aura. The only difference from normal was that it seemed to be distorting every couple of seconds. As she swung her blades, arcs of pure black energy lashed out from them. Though normally it'll be just that. This time, pitch black lightning danced off of the energy, striking the ground, creating small miniature craters. During her years living with her beloved, she had learned many things from him, thus including energy manipulation. This would have leveled the entire plane before her, but someone before her appeared. Her eyes widened when he blocked the attack. He looked at her with his beautiful eyes, and with a smirk. He redirected her attack. Hela's eyebrow twitched before she dispelled the attack, and lunged at the figure. The figure dodged all of her attacks. He grabbed his staff from his back, and he started to block her attacks with her blades. To the normal eye, even a superhuman, Asgardian with someone of Thor's caliber, it were as if they disappeared for moments, only to reappear for a mere second, then disappear once again. Each blow sending a massive shockwave that shocked the entire area. Shuriken, a voice yelled as they appeared once again, coated in energy. The guy appeared before Hela and delivered a devastating uppercut, but before she could shoot off uncontrollably, he grabbed her by the ankle, spun her, and threw her to the ground, before appearing again before her hand outstretched, and a ball of energy forming in his hand, spiraling. Rasengan! He slammed the ball of energy onto her back. Hela let loose a grunt of pain, before she growled and powered up even more. Her black aura expanding greatly before she charged at the figure with an angry glint in her eyes. The figure smirked, before he twirled his staff. Before he lunged at her, the second the two met, a massive shock wave echoed around the area again, before they disappeared one more time. Hela roared. The two of us began to exchange blows. Each blow was enough to shake the earth. Even beyond the planet, far beyond the planet, people felt the power. This went on for a long time. Each punch, each kick, each knee impact, caused the crater to form and grow deeper and deeper. Hela started to pant. She was rocketed up to the air by a knee to the stomach before she was slammed into the ground with a devastating drop kick. Hela groaned in pain, though you could see a blush on her cheeks. She was turned on. Had enough, dear? I asked. Yes, this figure was me, in case nobody here figured it out yet. Harder, Daddy, she moaned out in a mixture of pain and pleasure. I laughed, ignoring the heat rushing to my own cheeks at how sexy she sounded while saying that. I'm glad you're feeling better. I smirked, but come on, I have to train the kids, and you have to meet up with Thor. I still do not care for him right now. Hela mumbled. I nodded. You don't have to care for him, but just try to be with him. He is the same victim of your father after all. Hela sighed. I don't know. I got on top of her, causing her to once again moan. I thought you said you weren't going to fuck me? She asked, feeling the hardness of my dick against her ass under his pants. After you talk with Thor, I will have you screaming my name louder than you ever had before. I whispered to her. I stuck my tongue out and gave a rather long lick to her cheek, causing her to shiver in pleasure and anticipation. She jumped up to her feet in an instant, almost knocking me off of her, but before I impacted the ground, she grabbed me by my shirt and pulled me into a breathtaking kiss. After a long moment she let go and smirked. I look forward to it, dear, she cooed, before she slowly walked away, her hips swaying with each step. I stared for a while, even when she was out of sight. Damn! I muttered. I am one lucky son of a bitch. Chapter 37. Bonding by Lightning. While I was fighting with Hela, the four sat in silence, as they awkwardly gazed at each other. As one could already tell, Jine was getting sick of this. She hates things like this. She wants everything to be, I don't know, comfortable. She is the first person to break the silence. All right, Goldilocks. What do you want? Thor perks up, and tilted his head in confusion. What do you mean, young one? This whole awkward silence thing. Jine groaned. It's annoying. And I know for some weird reason that you're the cause of it. And the fact that you keep glancing up at us nervously as you're looking down is proof enough. Thor glanced down in shame. You see. Jine growled. You did it again. Stop doing that, and tell us what you want. Thor swallowed, and looked up. I would like to apologize. Jine blinked. Apologize? Apologize for what? For threatening to attack you? Thor mumbled. It was unbecoming of me. Oh, that. Jine shrugged her shoulders. It's fine. It didn't really bother me anyway. She raised an eyebrow at all the looks she was getting. Why are you all looking at me like that? I am surprised you were able to forgive him that easily. Gohan responded to her with Zellera and Tina nodding in agreement. Yeah, I agree with Gohan, Zellera replied flatly. You seem to have an attitude against him. You do call him Goldilocks. Tina interjected. It's kind of offensive, considering she's a girl and he's a man. But he looks just like her. Jine defended herself. I mean, look at that blonde hair. It's so long someone could mistake him as a really buff girl, not to mention his blue eyes. At several looks. She groaned. Ugh, fine. I may be angry at him for causing the storm and knocking me out cold. She looked at Thor. I'm sorry, okay? Are we good? Jine raised her hand. I know it wasn't technically your fault, so let's shake on it. He looked at her hand like it was a strange creature he had never seen before. It's a Midgardian custom, brother, a voice said, startling both of them. Thor and the rest of the children turned to the door, to spot Hela leaning on the door with her arms crossed. She had an indifferent look on her face as she gazed at them. You're supposed to shake on it, she said. Way to make amends for past actions. Thor was shocked that Hela was even speaking to him. Once he heard her explanation, he slowly nodded his head. He looked at his hand, then at hers, before he slowly raised his hand and grasped hers. Jine smiled. Cool? She grasped his hand, and smirked, though I'm still calling you Goldilocks. Thor gave a small chuckle. That is fair. Suddenly orange sparks appeared in existence. Before they formed a circle. All right, kids. Mirror world. We will continue with where we left off with trying to use the Ikari forms. In the past they had already mastered the Ozaru transformation, I had made sure. The first thing was mastering their tails, then I helped them master Ozaru. Now they were focusing on chi and magic, and they had gotten good at it, so now I was focused on another thing, using the power of the great ape in their human form, which is something that I needed to teach them as well. Hela smiled as the four of us vanished into the mirror dimension. They're wonderful, aren't they? She asked as she slowly sat down. Indeed they are. Thor nodded. You taught them well. Half. Thor looked at Hela confused. It was Kakarot who did most of the work, Hela sighed. I did not know how to teach at the time. I still am learning. But Kakarot is the one where all the strength comes from. Impossible. Thor could not believe what he was hearing. You are an Asgardian princess, the true heir to the throne. How could all the strength come from a mortal, but not yourself? You think I would have fallen for him if he was just a simple mortal? Hela snarled, causing Thor to flinch. I'm not that low. She looked into the sky. I don't know how it happened, but... She gave a slow smile. He changed me. Thor looked down. I'm sorry. Save your sorry. Hela scoffed. I was never mad at you in particular, but mostly mad at our father. I see. Thor resisted the urge to defend his father. So many lies. So many hidden from him, from Asgard, and the fact that her and his father's conquest was not mentioned at all during the history books. Odin had hid away, though he remembers something in Midgard long ago about the tales mentioning an older sister, though he labeled that as scandalous and lies. Now everything is starting to make sense. He had never felt so foolish before, and he wondered what his brother would think. I am such a fool. Thor mumbled. Hela nodded her head. Oh, you are. Hela smirked. But little brother, as I said before, it was not your fault. All blame goes to my father. Do you plan to take the throne? Thor asked. Hela shook her head. No? I have everything I need and desire right here. She smiled softly. I have no use for the throne of Asgard, as all it would do was limit my duties as a mother and a wife. Thor nodded. He feels a sense of relief wash over him. Hela's smirk grew. Though I still will beat the shit out of my father for everything that he has done. He owes me that much. Shit? Thor asked. What does that mean? It's a Midgardian language, one of the many things I picked up from my beloved, Hela shrugged. Don't mind it. I see. Thor mumbled. Do you think you stand a chance against my father? He asked. Hela scoffed. Of course, it took everything he had in a fight to a point where he had no choice but to seal me. Ever since I had broken out, I had only grown stronger with Kakarot. Thor hummed. Well then, sister. He nodded his head. I might join you. Hela laughed. Pleasant thought, little brother. But going against him is still considered treason. And you are far too weak to do that now. After all, he banished and sealed your power away for someone else to use, and he did so with such ease. Thor grinned. I did not know you cared so much for me. Hela smiled. You are my little brother. Even if foolish and naive, you are merely a victim of my father's idiocy. That is something that makes me care is a stretch. But I suppose tolerate you would suffice. Thor smiled. I suppose that is fair. Chapter 39. Realization. Okay, now let's get this one thing straight. Do not call me sexy. Do not think that I'm sexy. It's weird, and it is very disturbing. I told them. Understood? Well, I don't dash. Understood. I cut Tina off, giving her a stern expression. She nodded slowly. Good, because the last thing I need is someone to call me a pedophile. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my forehead. Before I put my arm to the side. Now you will keep these forms the entire time you're in our house, I told them, unless there is people over, or when you are sleeping. They nodded. I smiled at them. Good, your mother would be so proud to see our own children become so powerful. We exited out of the mirror dimension, to see Hela and Thor just sitting there talking to each other. Hela was the first one to spot me. She got up and slowly walked up to me, placing a hand on my chest. You. Oh. Me, she said slowly. I raised her an eyebrow before I looked at Thor. Thor looked at us both confused, or more so, at the fact that our hairs and eye colors changed. I do. Remember what you said to me before? She asked with narrowed eyes. I blinked at her before suddenly. Flashback. Hela started to pant. She was rocketed up to the air by a knee to the stomach before she was slammed into the ground with a devastating drop kick. Hela groaned in pain, though you could see a blush on her cheeks. She was turned on. Had enough, dear? I asked. Yes, this figure was me, in case nobody here figured it out yet. Harder, Daddy. She moaned out in a mixture of pain and pleasure. I laughed, ignoring the heat rushing to my own cheeks at how sexy she sounded while saying that. I'm glad you're feeling better. I smirked, but come on, I have to train the kids, and you have to meet up with Thor. I still do not care for him right now. Hela mumbled. I nodded. You don't have to care for him, but just try to be with him. He is the same victim of your father after all. Hela sighed. I don't know. I got on top of her, causing her to once again moan. I thought you said you weren't going to fuck me? She asked, feeling the hardness of my dick against her ass under his pants. After you talk with Thor, I will have you screaming my name louder than you ever had before. I whispered to her. I stuck my tongue out and gave a rather long lick to her cheek, causing her to shiver in pleasure and anticipation. Flashback end. I blinked. Oh. She smirked seductively. Oh is right. She grabbed me by my gi and dragged me to the bedroom. Thor watched on, confused. What are they doing? It's none of our business, Gohan replied, with a slight blush on his cheeks as he could hear the moans before they were suddenly cut off. An orange glow flashed through the room before it disappeared. Thor nodded his head. You've changed. It's none of your business, Goldilocks. Jine crossed her arms. She looked at him with an raised eyebrow. You're in a better mood though. What got your hopes up? Your mother and I made up. Thor replied evenly. Though I suppose she was never mad at me to begin with. That explains why she allowed us to call you Uncle Thor. Gohan shrugged. Although I don't know why she allowed us to call him Grandpa. I'm sure your mother has her reasons. Thor responded. Meanwhile with me and Hela. NSFW warning. Oh shit, I moaned. as I was forced onto my back with Hela on top of me cowgirl style. She smirked as black lightning burnt all of her clothes away, leaving nothing but nudity for my eyes to see plainly. "Take them off," she growled, her eyes flashing black. I smiled and did what was told. A burst of my own ki, a flash of aura, and my clothes were off clean, showing me in the nude as well. Hela ran a hand down my chiseled chest before her fingers made contact with my meat stick. She smirked, before she let out a pleasant squeal as I suddenly flipped her over. Hela's back landed onto the mattress. I smirked, "Know your place." I gave a quick thrust, my dick going into her pussy in an instant. The second my waist met hers, a loud clapping sound echoed throughout the room, as her ass cheeks gave a very pleasant jiggle. "Oh fuck," she muttered as her rolled to the back of her head, before coming back. Hela's back arched. She gave a loud scream as she came right there. I smirked, "Came already?" "I knew you were fast, but I was cut off when a hand lashed out and grabbed me by my throat." She flipped me over. Now she was on top. She spread out her arms and opened her palms before she summoned her blades and slammed them to the ground. She grasped hold of them and used them as leverage while she started to violently ride me. "How, Njich? How does that feel, cockroach?" Multiple spikes of pleasure shot through my spine, causing me to groan and shift in pleasure, as she bounced on my dick. Tits moving up and down. She started to pant as she arched her back. Her waist became a blur as she rode me as hard as she could. She rode me so fast that not only was she a blur, her own power was seen before her as sparks of black lightning appeared sparkling all over her body. Her eyes started to glow black while they were half-lied. "Oh, NGGG, yes," she moaned. Stretching over, I wrapped her hands around her waist, flipped her over. Now she had her back laid out against my chest. I wrapped my hands around her chest and started to thrust really fast. "Oh, fuck," she moaned out as she arched her back, once again coming. My smirk grew, before I started to thrust with a lot of force. Each thrust sent Hela into a spiraling haze of pleasure. One last thrust with more force than I came. Hela's eyes almost rolled to the back of her head, before she forced them back. She was panting extremely heavy, as was I. After a while I managed to get my voice back. I smirked at her. "MNN." That I was cut off, as I was suddenly flipped onto my back. Hela grabbed my ankles and pulled my legs up. "Didn't think it was over, did you?" she smirked. I smirked back. "I'd be disappointed if it was." I smirked back, causing her smirk to grow, before she lowered herself onto me. Grasping her blade, she began to ride me as fast as she could. NSFW end. A couple of hours later we were panting on the bed. Both of us had smiles on our faces, with sweat dripping on both of our bodies. "You were amazing, my beloved." Hela panted. "You were amazing like always." "Same." I panted as well. "Hela, there is something that I need to talk to you about." She raised an eyebrow, her breathing getting slower. "OH? And what may that be?" "Our children, specifically the female side, they seem to have an attraction to me." I replied to her. Hela closed her eyes and chuckled. "I knew that already, dear." "I know, just wanted to be sure." I looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "And you do not find that disturbing?" She smiled at me. "I actually find it quite cute," she said. "Besides, it was as you said before. Use moments as tools to publicly embarrass them in the future." I chuckled. "I never actually thought of it like that." She smiled. As she slowly got up, she took a shaky step before her legs buckled. She caught herself with her hand onto the floor. "You fucked me too good," she mumbled. "So, did you?" I smirked. I slowly walked over to her and touched her shoulders. Her body was bathed in an orange glow, before she was enveloped in it. When he light faded, she sighed. "Thanks, cockroach." "No problem." I grinned. "Let's go meet with the others." Chapter 40. Mistress Earth. /N. Shorter chapter. Hela closed her eyes and sighed. She opened them, and this time she was different. She decided to go for something different. She wore a black battle dress with green outlining. It looked like one of those badass sci-fi battle outfits that I have seen in those video game things in my previous life. She had on a pair of shades, with a pitch black crown on her head, symbolizing her authority as a princess. She had her blades, and she had 2 sword holders on her back as she strapped them in. "Nice." I smirked at her. She smirked back. "Isn't it?" "I wanted to try something else," she said as she trailed a hand down her beautiful curves. After being on Midgard for so long, I realized that the crown on my head actually hinders me. so I reshaped it and made it into a crown that they all would recognize. I think the current queen of Asgard might agree with you. Ah yes, she frowned. Another lie father gave out. I looked at her with a raised eyebrow, she noticed. Are you aware that she is not the mother of Thor? Of course, Mistress Earth is the mother of Thor, not Frigga. Hela frowned. Mistress Earth? I smiled at her and pinched her cheek. It's so cute when you're jealous. I let go and clarified. Mistress as in my teacher. I said to her, she is another one of my teachers who had taught me how to become a sage. You never spoken of this, she said with an interesting look on her face. You and Gaia. She tried it. I crossed my arms. But I knew where she has been, so I refused. She raised an eyebrow. Oh? Yeah. I shivered. She's a horg. You say that like it's a bad thing, dear, a voice cooed. Hela and I immediately got in a stance. Only for me to sigh as I realized who it was. I felt a pair of breasts pressed onto my back. Because you are my mistress, I say out of respect. Please get off me. I said. But you're so comfy. Gaia cooed. My littlest. She squeaked as Blade hit her square in the shoulders, causing her to crumble into dust into the ground before reappearing. It's never been fun ever since you married, she sighed. I gave her a look. What do you want, Mistress Earth? Well, I heard how much you gave Hela dear a good time and wanted to join in. Her eyes turned half-lidded. Hela lunged at Gaia again, but I grabbed her and pulled her back. Gaia, you yourself are married. Go get your husband. But he can never fuck me like you fuck Hela. I want you to dominate me like you do her. Don't you want to know what it feels like to fuck the earth? I am married. I growled slowly. And so are you. Do you not have any shame? Gaia shrugged and giggled, eyeing me up and down. Shame? Shouldn't you be the one in shame? You are still nude in front of me. Not that I mind it, she gave a low moan. I closed my eyes and sighed. Before I opened them, I wanted to try something different. Today, I wore the exact fan-made outfit the fans made Goku in Dragon Ball AF. Noise, she smirked, my eyebrow twitched. Before she was grabbed by the throat and slammed to the wall by Hela. A glow around Gaia symbolized that she was restricted. You dare, in front of me? She growled. You're lucky I don't blow up this planet for your insolent drivel. She gave a low moan. Oh, you want to play me like that, do you, dear? She smirked. Go ahead and punish me then. I have been a bad girl. I shivered. Hela enough. She clenched her neck even harder, electing another moan from her. Let her go, she is never going to relent. She gave one last glare to Gaia before she nodded and slowly let go. Gaia smiled. Well, no matter how strong you are, you still are so much fun to tease, she said with a grin. Anyway, the real reason why I am here. She closed her eyes and in a flash revealed herself in an emerald green dress. I wanted to properly thank you both for beating some sense into my son, she said with a bow. Chapter 38. Weirded Out. Elemental magic comes first, followed by Ozaru. Now, you have meditated enough to control your Ozaru, you must try to use that in your base form. I closed my eyes before they snapped open, revealing a beautiful golden color. My hair spiked up to resemble Goku's Super Saiyan form. This is what I call an Ikari form. Ikari is a form that uses the Ozaru form in your normal state. I want you all to accomplish again, like we have been doing. I get it, father. Zellera said. You look even hotter in that form. I gave her a blank look, as did Gohan and Jine. Tina didn't mind, in fact she agreed. I agree with Zellera, Dad. You are sexier with that look, with the golden eyes and bigger muscles. You're both gross. Jine deadpanned. Just stating the truth. Tina shrugged her shoulders. Nothing wrong with that. First of all, you're too young to be thinking about that. Gohan said flatly. Secondly, you're his daughters. You're not supposed to think about that to your dads. Noon is built like our dad. Tina disagreed. I've seen older people his age and not one of them have the same body. Also, I have heard our teachers talk about our parents behind our backs like we didn't understand, but we did. Among other things, it is clear that they find them extremely sexy as well. I will have to have a talk with the teachers then. I said with a blank tone. How dare the teachers corrupt my daughters in such a way? You wouldn't want Mom hearing about this. Gohan said with a low shudder. I love her, but she can be scary at times, especially when it comes to other ladies trying to flirt with our dad. Mom already knows. Zellera replied flatly. She doesn't get angry over the truth. She knows Dad is the sexiest man alive. I blinked. Okay. Yes, we aren't trying to flirt with him, Tina agreed. We are merely stating a truth. Mom hates it when people flirt with him, especially in front of her, but she doesn't care in the slightest when people just speak the truth. Well, this is all horrifyingly fascinating hearing my own daughters call me sexy. I deadpanned. Let's move on to the training. Sit down in a meditative position, all of you. They nodded and did what was told. I smiled. Good, now close your eyes. They did so. I clenched my fist and closed my eyes, bringing forth a ball of ki. This wasn't just any ki though. This was something I was only able to create with my anime and manga knowledge of Dragon Ball Z, whether it be canon or non-canon, and multiple fanfictions. Burst open and mix. It did so, forming an artificial energy moon. Remember, imagine everything that you have ever loved taken from you. Let your emotions from that take control of your power, but do not let it control you. That is so confusing. Jine screamed in frustration. I can't do it. I understand. Gohan growled to himself. I already smiled at him. His tone was a mixture between a great ape and a human, just like myself. NGH. Gohan grunted. His eyes snapped open, revealing yellow eyes before they reverted back to normal in a split second. Nice, Gohan. I smiled at him. You almost had it that time. He panted slightly. Even though he smiled at the compliment I gave him, I could tell he was disappointed. How did you do it? Jine demanded, grabbing Gohan by the shoulders and shaking him. Tell me. SSSSTTOOPSHHHHAAKKINGME. I chuckled. My eyes suddenly locked on Zelera as her power started to rise exponentially. With gritted teeth, her hair started to spike up, before reverting back to normal repeatedly. Before her eyes snapped open, she let out a loud roar as her aura expanded before it blinded everything in its path. Once the light died down, Zelera stood with her hair spiked up, her eyes were golden, and she now had fangs in her mouth. She didn't grow buff, to my surprise. I mean, she grew a little mucal, but the muscle did nothing but enhance her feminine features. I doubt Zelera would care, but she did the same. Good job, Zelera. I said with a nod. How does it feel? She panted heavily. Amazing, she said. Simply amazing. We both felt another spike of energy and saw that Tina did the same thing as Zelera, followed by Gohan. The both of them stood up in their Ikari forms. Panting heavily, but both were very proud of themselves. Jine was frustrated. How is it possible for them to achieve that form? They couldn't even think straight because they were talking about how hot you were. All eyes turned to her, and my expression turned blank. And not that I think that, of course, why would I? She stammered, blushing red in embarrassment. This gathered even more interesting looks from her siblings. Why are you all looking at me like that? Nothing. Tina replied, smirking. You just said it was gross a few seconds ago. I just said you thought he was hot. Sure, I agreed with you, but I still thought it was. She was cut off. I raised my eyebrow at her. I am really going to have a talk with these teachers. Jine realized what she said. She decided it would be a good idea to shut up now. Okay. I cleared my throat. Although I am flattered, and very weirded out by the fact that my own daughters have crushes on me. I gave her a stern look. I need you to focus, as unlike you they know how and when to think about how sexy I am. I shuddered, and focus on my words and how to get the Ikari forms. I want you to meditate on what I said. We will all be here waiting. She stared at me, before she slowly nodded and did what was told. I sighed to myself. Honestly, and you're both way too young to be thinking about how sexy I am. But you are. Zelera replied flatly. It still doesn't make it any less wrong. I deadpanned. You are my daughters. And you are my daddy. Tina said with a shrug. What does it matter? I narrowed my eyes at her. Don't say it like that. Just Saiyan. She shrugged. I sighed. Where did I go wrong with you girls? Maybe our hormones go faster than humans. Gohan offered, which is why we are able to act more mature than other kids our age. Makes sense. Zelera nodded her head. It does. I agreed slowly. Suddenly another spike of power coming from Tina. All eyes locked on her as Tina's hair spiked up. Her eyes snapped open, revealing golden, before she let loose a loud scream that shook the entire area. The light of her aura, just like her siblings, covered the entire area. Once the light died down, she panted heavily. Congratulations. I said proudly, you've done it.